Hundreds of millions of years ago, Earth passed through night after night of catastrophe. The planet dried into continent-wide deserts, then shivered under volcanic winters as ash dimmed the sun. Oceans retreated, ice advanced, and more than once, an asteroid struck with enough energy to shake the crust and mantle together. During this time, whole ecosystems vanished. Yet some dinosaur lineages moved through these disasters as if they were severe but familiar seasons. The usual questions about dinosaurs focus on size and terror. Which predator had the strongest bite? Which sauropod towered highest above the surface? Which hunter ruled its forest? Here, the question is different. Which dinosaurs were built to survive almost anything? Across deserts, polar forests, and ash-choked lowlands, certain groups acted like specialists in endurance. Desert wanderers that walked between vanishing waterholes, polar foragers that endured months of darkness, low-slung armored tanks, and small feathered shadows that slipped through chaos and remained. Imagine a single dinosaur lying on the cracked ground of Pangaea under a cold, star-filled sky. The day's heat has bled away into space, and frost is forming along the edges of its tracks. Far away, volcanoes have filled the air with fine ash, turning sunsets into a dull red haze and making each breath a slow, heavy effort. Drought has stripped the landscape, and the nearest river is a shrinking line of mud. Yet the animal lowers its head, slows its heart, and waits out the freezing night. Over time, night after night like this becomes ordinary life. Against that image, human time feels narrow. Modern lives unfold across a few decades of quiet climate and reliable seasons, with worries that last years or days. These dinosaurs persisted through intervals when continents were still rearranging, when forests burned across entire regions, when impact winters dimmed the sun for months. The contrast is not meant to diminish human experience, but to place it gently inside a much longer history of survival. This journey will move calmly from the birth of Earth to the rise of these resilient creatures. The story begins when the planet first formed, when early crust floated over a hotter mantle and the first stable continents assembled. As a result of this long tectonic restlessness, supercontinents like Pangaea came together and then broke apart, driving climate whiplash, long droughts, and sudden cold snaps. This process shaped the environments that tested every living lineage. Through these shifting conditions, different survival architectures emerged. Ankylosaurs became heavy armored vehicles of bone and keratin, with bodies that could withstand both predators and harsh, dusty landscapes. Sauropods turned into long-necked, long-legged migrants, able to cross vast distances in search of food and water as continents dried. Small feathered theropods evolved insulating plumage and fast metabolisms, allowing them to endure cold, darkness, and volcanic winters that silenced larger animals. By the end of this quiet passage through deep time, the resilience of these dinosaurs will be clearer. Some lineages did not merely survive a single crisis. They passed through multiple global upheavals and returned. Because of this, their story offers more than ancient drama. It hints at how life on this planet absorbs shock, adapts to a restless Earth, and continues to endure. To understand how such endurance was even possible, the story must rewind far beyond dinosaurs, into the deep beginning of the planet itself. In Earth's earliest history, more than 4 billion years ago, the world was not a place of forests, rivers, or even stable rock. It was a glowing sphere of molten minerals, struck again and again by large objects left over from the birth of the solar system. During this time, intense impacts, radioactive decay, and internal pressure released enormous amounts of heat. Much of the young planet melted. Instead of a firm crust, Earth's outer layers behaved like a vast magma ocean. heavy elements such as iron and nickel sank inward to form the core. Lighter silicate materials rose and gradually formed the mantle and the first fragile skin of crust above it. As a result, the surface was thin, restless, and easily broken. The earliest crust was very different from the continents known today. It fractured under the rising heat from below, split along long cracks, and was pulled back down into the mantle. New molten rock then rose, spread, and cooled, forming fresh crust in repeating cycles. This process established a basic rule of the planet. The surface would never be fixed. Continents, when they finally formed as thicker rafts of buoyant rock, would ride on moving plates driven by slow convection in the mantle. At the same time, the air and oceans were only beginning to appear. Volcanic eruptions released water vapor, carbon dioxide, sulfur compounds, and other gases, building a dense, toxic atmosphere with almost no oxygen. As the planet's outer layers cooled, water vapor condensed into clouds, rain fell for long periods, and collected in low areas of the surface, forming the first long-lived oceans. These early seas were warm, mineral-rich, and chemically different from modern oceans. What kind of life could exist under such conditions? Evidence from ancient rocks suggests that simple single-celled organisms appeared surprisingly early. They learned to survive intense ultraviolet radiation beneath a dimmer sun, fluctuating temperatures near volcanic regions, and aggressive chemistry in the oceans. Many were extremophiles, using chemical energy from rocks and volcanic vents rather than sunlight. Over time, some evolved primitive photosynthesis, slowly altering the balance of gases in the air. From the beginning, this environment rewarded organisms that could endure stress rather than avoid it. Those that bent without breaking, that tolerated heat, acidity, or long periods of darkness, left descendants. Because of this, resilience became a deep inheritance in Earth's biosphere. Long before any dinosaur walked on land, the same deep forces that shattered and rebuilt the first crust did not stop. Plates continued to shift, collide, and separate, assembling and breaking apart early continents. Much later, these motions would draw scattered landmasses together into vast supercontinents. One of them would be called Pangaea, a world of interior deserts, seasonal extremes, and climatic shocks. In that demanding setting, certain dinosaur lineages would refine ancient survival strategies into remarkable adaptations. When those early plates began to drift in earnest, the planet gained a new kind of heartbeat. Instead of a silent, frozen shell, Earth's solid outer layer fractured into large, rigid plates that slowly slid, sank, and rose above the warmer mantle below. This movement did not race across the surface. It crept. Yet over millions of years, this process quietly rearranged entire worlds. In simple terms, each plate is a raft of crust riding on the mantle's slow convecting currents. Hot mantle material rises, spreads, and cools, pushing plates apart to open new oceans. Elsewhere, colder, heavier plates bend and sink back into the interior, dragging edges together. At those convergent boundaries, plates collide, crumple, and thicken, building mountain chains and deep roots that anchor new highlands to the planet. Over time, these motions produced a repeating pattern in Earth's history. Scattered continents drifted apart, then gradually converged again, gathering into giant supercontinents before rifting once more. This supercontinent cycle has probably occurred several times, with earlier examples such as Rodinia and Pannotia long before the age of dinosaurs. Each time, the same slow choreography played out. Oceans closed, mountains rose, and then fresh rifts opened to begin a new round of separation. When continents collide, the consequences for climate and life are profound. Thickened crust can be pushed upward into high plateaus, where thin air and intense sunlight create cold, dry conditions. On the flanks of these ranges, moist air is forced to rise, cool, and drop its moisture as rain or snow. the far side receives little. As a result, broad range shadows form, where deserts and scrublands spread in the lee of the mountains. How would organisms cope when once lush lowlands became windswept uplands or parched basins? Supercontinents amplify these contrasts even further. When most of Earth's land is fused into a single mass, the interior lies far from moderating oceans. Summers there can become intensely hot and dry, while winters swing toward bitter cold. Monsoon systems develop along the margins, bringing seasonal floods and droughts that rearrange rivers and lakes year after year. Because of this, the planet's surface turns into a shifting laboratory for resilience, testing which lineages can endure extremes of temperature, moisture, and seasonality. Every major rearrangement of plates reshaped habitats. Coastlines moved, seaways closed, and migration routes opened or vanished. During this time, some species found their ranges squeezed into shrinking refuges, while others rode the new connections into unfamiliar regions. Ecosystems were stressed, pruned, and rebuilt. Only the most adaptable lineages persisted, and some of them used these disruptions to radiate into fresh ecological niches. When Pangaea finally assembled, it brought these forces together on a continental scale. Vast interior deserts, powerful monsoon belts, and forests that reached into polar latitudes created demanding environments where survival required more than simple toughness. In those settings, long-necked sauropods, low-slung ankylosaurs, and small-feathered theropods would begin to refine their bodies into survival architectures tuned to drought, dust, cold snaps, and darkness. The plates had set the stage. The next question was, which dinosaurs would learn to treat catastrophe as ordinary weather? The plates had set the stage. The next question was, which dinosaurs would learn to treat catastrophe as ordinary weather? To answer that, it helps to pause the names and dates for a moment and ask a different question. If this planet keeps changing the rules over and over, what kind of creature actually wins the long game? On a world where climate, sea level, and atmosphere refuse to stay constant, survival becomes less about brief dominance and more about enduring long stretches of discomfort. Across Earth's history, many of the most dramatic animals were also among the most fragile. Large, specialized predators often depended on narrow ranges of temperature, prey, and habitat. When drought arrived, when ash dimmed the sun, or when coastlines retreated, those specialists lost the exact conditions that had made them successful. In contrast, low, armored grazers, desert walkers, and small feathered generalists tended to persist. They were not always the most visible, but they were often the ones still present after a crisis ended. This contrast points to a deeper pattern that can be thought of as survival architecture. During this time and in many other intervals, certain body plans and behaviors acted like built-in emergency systems. Armor spread weight and impact, turning attacks and falling debris into manageable hazards. Thick insulation, whether in the form of scales, fat, or feathers, buffered sudden swings in temperature. Oversized digestive systems allowed animals to process tough, low-quality plants when lush vegetation disappeared. Flexible diets turned scarcity into a puzzle rather than a dead end. Some dinosaurs embodied these designs with remarkable clarity. Ankylosaurs, with their dense armor and low-slung bodies, were built to absorb punishment from both predators and harsh environments filled with dust and grit. Long-necked sauropods carried massive digestive chambers that could turn dry, fibrous plants into energy, even during extended drought. Small feathered theropods combined insulation, high metabolisms, and agile behavior, allowing them to endure cold snaps, volcanic winters, and months of dim light near polar regions. Because of this, catastrophe became survivable rather than final. The challenges these animals faced were extreme. Prolonged droughts shrank rivers into chains of muddy pools. ash-choked skies followed major eruptions, cooling the surface and darkening entire regions for months. In high latitudes, polar dinosaurs endured long winters and extended darkness, relying on keen senses and internal heat to stay active. This process of repeated stress acted like a filter, favoring creatures that could handle boredom, scarcity, and sudden shocks without collapsing. In a quieter way, the same pattern appears in the present world. Modern climate change, shifting coastlines, and altered weather patterns echo earlier experiments that Earth ran on its own biosphere. The details differ, but the principle is similar. Organisms with broad tolerances and flexible habits are more likely to continue as conditions drift away from what once felt normal. Over time, the planet rewards adaptability more than spectacle. To understand how dinosaurs reached this level of resilience, it is necessary to step further back in time. Before any dinosaur left a footprint, earlier lineages were already testing versions of armor, insulation, and flexible metabolism. In the next part of the story, Earth will be seen running these trials again and again through ancient continents and earlier extinctions. As a result, the tools that dinosaurs later inherited will appear not as sudden inventions, but as the refined products of many failed worlds. Long before any dinosaur tested its armor or feathers, the planet had already been running survival trials for billions of years. The stage they would later inherit was prepared by organisms far smaller and worlds far stranger than any later forest or floodplain. During Earth's earliest history, life seems to have appeared in warm, mineral-rich seas beneath a harsh sky. Simple microbes clung to rocks near hydrothermal vents, used dissolved chemicals for energy, and endured intense ultraviolet radiation that poured through an oxygen-poor atmosphere. The crust was still restless, the mantle still releasing great amounts of heat, and the chemistry of the oceans shifted often. Yet these early cells persisted, dividing, mutating, and slowly exploring new ways to capture energy. Over time, some microbes evolved photosynthesis. Thin microbial mats spread across shallow seafloors, using sunlight to split water and releasing oxygen as waste. At first, this oxygen reacted with dissolved iron, staining ancient sediments with red layers. Eventually, it began to leak into the atmosphere. This planetary shift, called the Great Oxygenation Event, acted as a slow global experiment. Many lineages that could not tolerate oxygen declined or vanished, while others evolved metabolisms that used it to extract more energy from food. Because of this, life that could handle internal oxidative stress gained a powerful advantage. Cells built new enzymes, reinforced membranes, and developed ways to repair molecular damage. Later rises in atmospheric oxygen repeated this process, favoring organisms with efficient respiration and more active lifestyles. The planet's air was being tuned step by step for creatures that could move, hunt, and withstand higher metabolic demands. When oxygen levels and ocean chemistry stabilized enough, multicellular organisms began to appear. During this time, the Cambrian seas filled with unfamiliar forms, trilobites with jointed armor, spiny predators with grasping appendages, and soft-bodied swimmers that filtered the water. Later Paleozoic oceans developed complex food webs with corals, brachiopods, early fish, and vast seafloor communities. Life was no longer a thin film. It had become an intricate, three-dimensional network. The next transformation came when organisms started to leave the water. Plants colonized damp shorelines, sending simple roots into cracks in the crust, and releasing oxygen and organic acids onto bare rock. Arthropods followed, scuttling across tidal flats and early soils. This process slowly turned barren coasts into low green landscapes, with patches of vegetation that trapped sediment, built thicker soils, and moderated local climates. Among vertebrates, lobe-finned fish began testing the boundary between water and land. Early tetrapods, with 4 sturdy limbs and strengthened backbones, dragged themselves through shallow channels and onto mudflats. On land, they faced dehydration, stronger gravity, and wider temperature swings. To survive, they evolved tougher skin, more efficient lungs, and sensory systems that worked in air rather than water. As continents shifted and mountain belts rose, climates changed again and again. Several mass extinctions struck Paleozoic ecosystems, pruning many of these early experiments. Each crisis cleared ecological space, removing dominant groups and allowing new lineages to expand. In the fractured landscapes that followed, the foundations of later reptile and archosaur diversity were laid, preparing the world that dinosaurs would eventually enter and transform. Each crisis reshaped the map of life, and the crust beneath that life was shifting as well. Long before the famous outline of Pangaea appeared, earlier continental assemblies were already testing how far land vertebrates could be pushed. Millions of years before dinosaurs, Earth carried a different set of giant landmasses, drifting across the planet and colliding in slow motion. During this time, scattered cratons and island arcs began to merge into larger continental blocks. In the southern hemisphere, the core of a vast landmass called Gondwana formed, knitting together what would one day become South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and the Indian subcontinent. To the north, smaller pieces assembled into Laurussia. As these continents collided, long mountain chains rose where plates crumpled, while broad interior basins sagged behind them. This process did more than rearrange coastlines. When continents clustered near the equator, they interrupted ocean currents and wind patterns. Humid air moving inland dropped heavy rains over low-lying regions, feeding widespread coal swamps that preserved thick layers of plant material. Farther from the equator and higher in elevation, drier uplands formed with more seasonal rivers and open woodlands. Because of this, the same supercontinent could hold steaming wetlands, parched plateaus, and cool highlands at the same time. Early land vertebrates had to navigate these sharp climate gradients. Amphibian lineages still depended on standing water for breeding and for keeping their skin moist. They thrived in the equatorial swamp belts, but struggled in the more seasonal interiors. In contrast, emerging reptile-like vertebrates, the early amniotes, carried their own miniature ponds within their eggs. Their shelled, protective eggs allowed embryos to develop on land, far from lakes and floodplains. Over time, this innovation changed how life used the continents. Early amniotes could follow rivers upstream, cross drier valleys, and occupy upland plains where amphibians could not persist. Tougher skin reduced water loss, and more efficient lungs drew oxygen from warm, sometimes stagnant air. In these inland habitats, small, agile forms experimented with feeding and movement strategies that hinted at the later independence from wetlands seen in true reptiles and eventually in dinosaur lineages. The late Paleozoic climate added another layer of pressure. As Gondwana drifted across the high southern latitudes, large ice sheets advanced and retreated. Repeated glaciations locked water into ice, lowering sea level and cooling global climates, then gave way to warmer intervals when ice melted and coastlines flooded. Lineages were forced to migrate, adapt, or vanish as habitats shifted back and forth across the continents. Those with better water conservation, stronger respiratory systems, and resilient skin or scales had an advantage in these unstable conditions. Each climatic swing filtered vertebrate communities, favoring forms that could endure drought, temperature extremes, and fluctuating food supplies. At the same time, ongoing plate motion continued to drive Gondwana and Laurussia toward one another. With every collision, mountain belts lengthened and interior regions expanded, setting the stage for a new, even larger supercontinent. Pangaea was assembling, and it would amplify these environmental extremes into the background conditions that future dinosaurs would have to master. What would life need to survive on a world-spanning continent, almost impossible to escape? As Pangaea continued to assemble, its growing interior changed from a patchwork of wetlands into something far harsher. The distance from ocean to inland basin increased, and with it, the tendency for long dry seasons, sudden storms, and strong temperature swings between day and night. Large regions of the supercontinent's heart began to resemble semi-deserts and scrublands rather than the lush coal swamps that had dominated earlier in Earth's history. During this time, many organisms still depended on constant moisture. Amphibians and swamp-adapted plants were tied to rivers, lakes, and coastal plains. When seasonal droughts arrived, pools shrank, soils cracked, and the air above the surface heated and cooled rapidly. These new patterns challenged any lineage that could not travel far from water or protect its tissues from drying out. The planet was, in effect, running a large-scale experiment in life's response to land that no longer guaranteed regular rain. In the late Permian, a group of land vertebrates called synapsids, along with early reptiles, began to explore different body designs that fit this new world. Many developed limbs held more beneath the body, rather than sprawled to the sides, producing more upright postures. This process reduced the energy cost of walking and allowed longer journeys across open ground. At the same time, changes in the ribcage and internal passages of the skull supported more efficient breathing, so these animals could move and forage without stopping frequently to rest. Their outer coverings also shifted. Instead of thin, water-permeable skin, some lineages evolved thicker, more heavily keratinized scales or skin layers that limited water loss. Because of this, they could endure dry winds and intense sunlight for longer periods. Tougher skin, stronger limbs, and improved lungs together formed an early survival architecture for life on the high, dry interiors of the continents. Feeding systems were changing as well. Earlier vertebrates often had simple, peg-like teeth suited to soft prey. Now, more complex jaws and tooth patterns appeared. Some synapsids developed differentiated teeth, cutting incisors, piercing canines, and grinding cheek teeth that could process fibrous, drought-hardened vegetation. Others refined slicing teeth for varied prey, from burrowing animals sheltering in the soil to scavenged carcasses left by heat and water stress. Over time, this flexibility in diet meant that when one resource failed, another could still sustain a population. These innovations foreshadowed features that would later characterize many dinosaurs: efficient lungs that could support active movement over great distances, limb postures that conserved energy on long treks between oases, and jaws capable of handling a wide range of plant and animal material. In a sense, the late Permian was constructing the template for resilience that Mesozoic reptiles would inherit and refine. Yet just as life seemed to be mastering dryness and temperature extremes, Earth's interior began preparing a far more severe challenge. Vast volcanic provinces started to form, releasing enormous amounts of heat and gases from the mantle. Climate patterns destabilized. Could even these newly resilient land vertebrates endure what was coming next? When the Permian-Triassic mass extinction nearly erased the very experiments that had made survival on a dry planet possible. For a moment in Earth's history, it was not clear that complex life would ever recover. Long before the first true dinosaurs walked across Pangaea, the planet entered the Permian-Triassic crisis, an event so severe that it nearly sterilized the oceans and emptied the continents of vertebrates. This was not just another extinction. It was almost the end of the experiment. During this time, enormous volcanic provinces erupted across what is now Siberia. These Siberian traps did not behave like single mountain volcanoes. Instead, great fractures opened in the crust, and lava poured out over vast regions, building thick layers of basalt that stacked one upon another. As this process continued for hundreds of thousands of years, it released huge volumes of carbon dioxide, methane, and toxic gases from the mantle into the atmosphere. The consequences spread through every part of the planet. Ash and aerosols darkened the skies, turning sunlight harsh and irregular. Greenhouse gases trapped more heat, driving temperatures higher on land and in the oceans. Many regions of Pangaea became intensely dry, while others experienced sudden, violent storms. Because of this unstable climate, ecosystems that had taken tens of millions of years to form began to collapse in only a short geological interval. In the oceans, the crisis deepened. Warm water held less dissolved oxygen, and circulation patterns slowed. Large areas of the seafloor turned into low oxygen or even anoxic zones. At the same time, carbon dioxide dissolving into seawater made the oceans more acidic, weakening shells and skeletons. Coral communities, trilobites, and many other long-lived groups vanished. Around 90% of marine species disappeared, leaving vast stretches of seafloor almost barren. Life on land suffered a similar shock. Forests died back under heat, drought, and acid rain. Soils eroded from the exposed surface, washing into rivers and further stressing coastal environments. Most large land vertebrates disappeared, and even hardy insect groups declined. Survival now demanded unusual tolerance to heat, to toxins in air and water, to low oxygen, and to long periods when food chains were broken. Which lineages could endure such conditions? Only the most adaptable and resilient organisms passed through this narrow bottleneck. Small generalist vertebrates with flexible diets, efficient breathing, and rapid reproduction fared better than large specialists. Some early archosaur relatives, along with ancestors of mammals and other groups, persisted in scattered refuges. Over time, these survivors carried forward bodies and metabolisms already tested by extremes. This is where the story bends toward the dinosaurs. The distant ancestors of true dinosaurs, and many of their eventual competitors, emerged from this crucible shaped for chaos. Elevated metabolic rates, improved limb postures, and more effective respiratory systems were not just advantages for movement. They were pre-adaptations for living on a volatile planet. Seen from this angle, the later rise of dinosaurs is not only about dominance on Pangaea. It is about life's ability to thread a needle through catastrophe and then build new forms on the far side. As the narrative moves into the late Triassic, it will follow descendants of these survivors as they enter deserts, floodplains, and highlands, carrying the memory of near extinction in their bones. What kinds of creatures emerge when the world has already almost ended once? When the smoke of the end Permian catastrophe finally thinned, Earth did not return to anything familiar. It entered the early Triassic, a drawn-out aftermath in which the planet's surface seemed to hesitate between recovery and collapse. Imagine continents stripped almost to bare rock, rivers choked with sediment, and hillsides that failed to hold together after every rare storm. This was not yet a thriving world. It was a world that had survived. During this time, biodiversity remained painfully low. Forests that once tied soils in place had largely vanished, so rainwater carved the crust into raw gullies and broad braided channels. Simple plant communities of ferns and seed ferns clung to floodplains, while vast uplands stayed nearly barren. Food chains were short. A few hardy herbivores grazed on sparse vegetation, and predators hunted them across open ground, leaving little complexity in between. As a result, entire ecosystems could still be toppled by a single prolonged drought or heat wave. The climate itself added another layer of stress. High levels of volcanic carbon dioxide trapped heat in the atmosphere and created a powerful greenhouse. Summers on the interior of the continents were long and intensely hot, with soil surfaces baking and cracking. Rainfall arrived in erratic bursts, sometimes delivering destructive floods after months of dryness. This process of heating, drying, and sudden deluge repeated again and again, preventing stable forests from returning for millions of years. In this harsh setting, a new group began to stand out: the archosaurs. These were not yet the famous dinosaurs of later ages, but a broader lineage that also included the ancestors of crocodiles and pterosaurs. Many archosaurs carried their limbs more directly beneath the body, rather than sprawling to the sides. This more upright gait allowed them to travel farther across open plains, conserving energy as they moved between scattered water sources and patches of vegetation. Inside their bodies, changes were just as important. Archosaurs likely possessed more efficient lungs and higher aerobic capacity than many of the surviving reptile groups around them. Because of this, they could keep moving and hunting during intense heat or after long journeys when other animals would have been forced to rest. Over time, those that could breathe deeply, cool themselves effectively, and tolerate stress had a clear advantage in a world that rarely offered comfort. Among these archosaurs were the earliest dinosaurs, but they did not yet dominate. They were small, lightly built animals, probably quick and wary, slipping between larger relatives that ruled the floodplains. In many regions, crocodile-line archosaurs were the top predators and major herbivores, while dinosaurs remained a modest experiment in posture and metabolism, one branch in a broader trial of survival strategies. All of this played out on continents that were slowly drawing together. As the mantle continued to move tectonic plates, the scattered landmasses assembled into the supercontinent Pangaea. This enormous landmass would bring its own challenges: interior deserts that stretched for thousands of kilometers, seasonal monsoon belts along coasts, and polar regions with strong seasonal contrasts. The early archosaurs that had endured the bleak early Triassic would now have to prove themselves again, crossing a world where distance, dryness, and climate extremes became the new tests of resilience. Now the challenge expanded to a planetary scale. By the late Paleozoic and into the early Mesozoic, most of Earth's scattered continents had collided and welded together, forming a single landmass that stretched almost from pole to pole. Geologists call this supercontinent Pangaea, and it became the stage on which the next phase of dinosaur resilience would be tested. Earlier in Earth's history, the planet's land had been divided into smaller continents, separated by wide oceans. Moisture could move inland more easily, and few places were truly isolated from the sea. Over time, plate motions driven by mantle heat pushed these fragments together. Crust thickened where they collided, mountain belts rose, and long sutures of deformed rock marked the zones where continents had finally locked into place. This process did not happen quickly. It unfolded over tens of millions of years, but the outcome was dramatic. When Pangaea stood complete, the arrangement of land and ocean was unlike anything on the planet today. A single continuous coastline rimmed an immense interior. Because of this geometry, moist ocean air could not penetrate far into the middle of the continent. The result was a world of sharp contrasts, humid belts along the coasts, and a vast, dry heartland where distance itself became an environmental force. Along the coastal margins, warm seas fed thick clouds. Seasonal shifts in solar heating drove intense monsoons, with months of heavy rain, followed by long dry intervals. Rivers swelled and spilled across broad floodplains, then shrank back into braided channels. These wet-dry cycles left layers of mud, sand, and coal that still record the rhythm of ancient storms. Far inland, conditions were very different. The interior of Pangaea contained megadeserts that may have stretched for thousands of kilometers. Summers were scorching, with clear skies and little relief from the sun. Winters, stripped of oceanic moderation, could be surprisingly cold, with frost and even seasonal snow in some regions. Seasonal rivers carved through dune fields, flowing briefly after distant rains and then vanishing, leaving behind isolated waterholes. Near the poles, Pangaea carried dense forests that endured long periods of winter darkness. During this time, the sun dipped low or disappeared entirely for weeks to months, while summers brought continuous light. Trees and animals had to survive extended cold, low light, and slow seasonal growth. Fire also became a frequent presence on many parts of the supercontinent, as dry seasons turned floodplains and conifer stands into fuel ready to ignite. Such extremes imposed constant survival pressures. Animals had to handle drought, sudden floods, wide temperature swings, and the need to migrate long distances between patchy oases of food and water. Efficient metabolisms, robust skeletons, and durable skin coverings offered clear advantages. Lineages that could store energy, regulate body temperature more effectively, or travel far without collapsing under heat or cold were favored as a result. Within this crucible, early dinosaurs and their relatives began to diversify into specialists tuned to different faces of Pangaea's harshness. Some would become long-limbed desert wanderers, able to cross dune seas and endure months of scarcity. Others would adapt to polar conditions, evolving traits that later polar dinosaurs would refine to survive long nights and short growing seasons. Still others would move toward heavy armor and low tank-like bodies, built to withstand both predators and a punishing environment. In the next phase of Earth's history, these experiments in survival architecture would define who endured and who vanished when the planet changed again. Those survival architectures now step onto a harsher stage. In the late Triassic, around 220 million years ago, Earth's single supercontinent faced a new kind of trial, a world drawn out into extremes, where resilience mattered more than size or strength. During this time, Pangaea stretched almost from pole to pole, and its interior behaved like a giant heat trap. Far from the coasts, moist ocean air rarely reached the land. As a result, vast belts of red desert spread across the supercontinent, their iron-rich sediments recording a landscape baked by intense sun. Seasonal monsoon belts pulsed along the margins, bringing short, violent rainy seasons followed by long, desiccating droughts. Between these zones, the crust began to tear as the supercontinent slowly prepared to break apart, forming volcanic rift valleys lined with lava flows, floodplains, and temporary lakes. This process of stretching and rifting created a patchwork of environments that swung between flood and famine. Rivers could swell into broad, muddy sheets during a monsoon season, then retreat into isolated pools under a relentless dry sky. In some years, volcanic eruptions darkened the atmosphere and released gases that altered climate and chemistry. What kind of animals could navigate a planet that alternated so sharply between too much water and almost none at all? Into this unstable world stepped the first true dinosaurs. They were not yet giants. Many were small, lightly built, and bipedal, moving on long hind limbs across sand flats and floodplains. Early theropods with narrow skulls and grasping hands hunted or scavenged among the debris left by receding waters. Early sauropodomorphs, still relatively slender compared to their later descendants, browsed on low and mid-height vegetation along the edges of Rift Valley forests. Their bodies carried key advantages in this stressed landscape. With an upright posture, their limbs were placed directly under the body, allowing efficient, sustained movement across wide territories. Their lungs and air sac systems, more similar to modern birds than to many of their contemporaries, likely moved air through the body with high efficiency, even when temperatures were high and oxygen levels modest. Because of this, early dinosaurs could remain active in the heat of the day, while many sprawling competitors, including large amphibians and reptilian relatives, were forced into water or shade. Diet and behavior added another layer of resilience. Many early theropods probably fed on insects, small vertebrates, and carrion, shifting targets as conditions changed. Early sauropodomorphs appear capable of processing a range of plant material, from soft shoots near water to tougher, drought-tolerant vegetation on higher ground. Over time, this generalist approach allowed dinosaurs to exploit scattered resources in deserts, monsoon floodplains, and rift valley margins, where more specialized animals struggled when their preferred habitats failed. Yet in the late Triassic, dinosaurs were still minor players. Large crocodile-line archosaurs, armored and powerful, dominated many river systems and plains. For the moment, they held the top positions in these volatile ecosystems. The balance would not last. Another mass extinction waited ahead, tied to the very rift valleys that were opening Pangaea, and in that crisis, the quiet advantages of these early dinosaurs would suddenly matter in ways that would reshape the planet's history. For a moment, it is easy to imagine the story turning toward ever larger, heavier forms, as if the future of dinosaurs belonged only to bulk and armor. Yet the real engine of their success was moving in the opposite direction. The most important dinosaurs on Earth at this stage were not giants. They were small, light animals, often no bigger than a dog, built less to dominate and more to endure. In many Triassic valleys, these early dinosaurs threaded between the ankles of the ruling reptiles. Their skeletons were lightly built. Long hind limbs, flexible hips, and balancing tails allowed them to sprint, pivot, and change direction with remarkable precision. Some could probably climb low branches or scramble over fallen trunks with ease. Instead of being lumbering tanks, the first dinosaurs were closer to nervous, fast-moving shadows that slipped through gaps in the landscape that larger bodies could not use. This small size carried quiet advantages. A light body needs less food and water, which matters on a planet where Pangaea's interior often shifted between drought and sudden flood. When vegetation failed along one river, these animals could cross ridges to another basin without exhausting their reserves. They also reproduced quickly. Shorter generation times meant that populations could rebound after fires, local volcanic events, or sudden freezes. As a result, even when individual animals were lost, the lineage could recover. Their physiology added another layer of resilience. Many researchers infer that early dinosaurs had active metabolisms and possibly elevated body temperatures compared with the sprawling reptiles around them. During this time, that trait changed how they used the day. In hot Triassic deserts, midday heat on the surface could be punishing. Small, fast dinosaurs could forage in the cooler hours of dawn and dusk, then retreat to shade, burrows, or dense vegetation when temperatures peaked. Because of this, they tapped into windows of time and patches of habitat that were closed to slower, less adaptable rivals. Over time, this pattern of being small, fast, and flexible became a recurring solution. Later in the Mesozoic, many of the lineages that survived regional crises kept this general lifestyle. Small feathered theropods, for example, combined insulation, high activity levels, and agile bodies that could exploit insects, small vertebrates, and even seeds. This process of surviving through mobility and rapid reproduction created lineages that could ride out droughts, short cold snaps, and periods of ash-darkened skies that followed eruptions. Seen in this light, the famous giants of the Jurassic and Cretaceous rested on a foundation built by these earlier, quieter survivors. The template for resilience was already in place before the largest sauropods or armored ankylosaurs spread across the continents. Yet the planet was not finished testing it. As rift valleys widened and volcanic activity intensified along the seams of Pangaea, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction approached, preparing to remove many dominant reptiles and open space for the descendants of those small, fast dinosaurs to expand into a transformed world. Millions of years later, along the seams of breaking Pangaea, the planet entered another crisis. The Triassic-Jurassic boundary marks a reset point in Earth's history, when the supercontinent's own breakup helped trigger an extinction that cleared the stage. What did that world look like as it began to fail? As Pangaea started to rift, great cracks opened in the crust between what would become Africa, North America, and Europe. Along these rift zones, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province formed, one of the largest volcanic regions in Earth's history. For hundreds of thousands of years, basaltic magma rose from the mantle, flooded across the surface, and released huge volumes of carbon dioxide, sulfur gases, and water vapor into the atmosphere. During this time, pulses of eruption drove rapid swings between intense greenhouse warmth and short volcanic winters. This process did not only heat the air. CO2 dissolving into seawater acidified the oceans, making it harder for many marine organisms to build shells. Ash and aerosols dimmed sunlight, damaging food webs on land and in the sea. Over time, ecosystems already stressed by drought and climate instability were pushed past their limits. The result was a global extinction that struck hardest at many of the dominant Triassic reptiles. Large crocodile-line archosaurs, which had once filled roles as top predators and armored herbivores, declined or vanished in many regions. Other reptile groups that had competed with early dinosaurs for food and space also disappeared. Across the continents, river valleys, floodplains, and coastal lowlands were left with vacant predator positions, empty browsing niches, and fewer mid-sized omnivores. Whole communities were suddenly missing key members. Dinosaurs were not newcomers when this happened. They were already widespread, small to medium in size, and adapted to hot, seasonal climates on Pangaea. Because of this prior expansion, they were positioned along many environmental gradients, from dry interiors to more humid margins. As the extinction removed competitors, dinosaur lineages expanded rapidly into the open space. Carnivorous forms grew larger and diversified their hunting strategies, while plant-eating groups experimented with new body plans and feeding heights. Their success was not simply a triumph of strength, it was a triumph of resilience. Groups that could endure repeated volcanic winters, sudden greenhouse spikes, and collapsing food chains were the ones that persisted. High growth rates, efficient lungs, and active metabolisms may have allowed many dinosaurs to survive on sparse resources and recover quickly when conditions improved. In this disrupted world, being able to cope with stress mattered more than any single weapon or bite force. As a result, the early Jurassic opened as a new era shaped by survivors. On the reorganized continents, some dinosaur lineages began the path toward gigantic sauropods able to move between distant water sources across drought-prone landscapes. Others evolved heavy armor and low, stable bodies, forming living tanks on predator-rich plains. In disturbed forests and along unstable coasts, small feathered hunters refined agile, warm-blooded lifestyles that could handle both heat and sudden cold. What new extremes would these descendants reach as the Jurassic world matured? As the Triassic experiments gave way to the Jurassic, the planet did not suddenly become gentle. Instead, the early Jurassic opened like a long, shifting test chamber, where new dinosaur designs met a world that was still unstable, but now rich with opportunity. This was the dawn of a different kind of resilience, built not only on survival, but on refinement. During this time, climates remained broadly warm, yet they were no longer uniform blankets of heat across Pangaea. Seasonal droughts still gripped interior basins, turning rivers into chains of shrinking pools. Along some coasts, persistent fog banks rolled in from warm seas, feeding narrow belts of moisture where hardy plants clung to rocky ground. Farther inland and upslope, upland forests formed on higher ground, where cooler air, frequent mists, and more reliable rainfall created pockets of stability above the stressed lowlands. Recovering ecosystems spread into the gaps left by earlier crises. New plant communities formed mosaics across the continents, with ferns and seed ferns weaving through increasingly extensive conifer forests. These conifers with deep roots and waxy needles tolerated dry seasons and thin soils, so they advanced over time into regions that earlier forests could not hold. Insects diversified above and within this rising greenery, drilling wood, pollinating early seed plants, and providing moving packets of protein that linked forest canopies, understories, and open ground. In this layered world, dinosaurs were no longer rare experiments at the edges of ecosystems. They were becoming central frameworks. Sauropodomorphs pushed their bodies toward new extremes, shifting from medium-sized bipeds into heavier, longer forms that tested how large a land animal could become. Early stegosaurs and ankylosaurs appeared as low, broad herbivores, already carrying plates, spikes, and armor along their backs. Diverse theropods, from small feathered runners to more heavily built hunters, explored nearly every carnivorous niche, from insect chasing to large prey pursuit. As a result, specialization began to focus not only on what these animals ate, but on how they endured the planet's shifting stresses. Some sauropodomorphs adapted to move efficiently between scattered food sources and distant water, turning their long necks and deep bodies into systems that could process low-quality vegetation and store reserves through lean periods. Early stegosaurs and ankylosaurs refined low centers of gravity and protective coverings that helped them withstand both predators and abrasive, dusty environments. Among theropods, feathered forms and high metabolisms supported active hunting in variable temperatures, allowing them to handle sudden cold snaps or long dry seasons more effectively than many rivals. This process of environmental filtering meant that every drought, storm, and local disturbance served as a quiet selection event. Which body plans could handle heat waves followed by chill nights? Which digestive systems could extract enough energy from tough conifer needles or drought-hardened shrubs? Because of this constant testing, the early Jurassic became a workshop where survival architectures were strengthened, discarded, or rebuilt. The coming chapters will slow this scene down. How did sauropods turn their immense guts into engines that buffered them against scarcity and climate swings? In what ways did ankylosaurs evolve into walking bunkers, able to endure both attack and harsh landscapes? And how did small feathered theropods learn to ride out winters, volcanic disruptions, and sudden darkness, treating catastrophe as just another season on an ever-changing Earth? To understand those survival architectures, it helps to see dinosaurs moving through a repeating loop. Tectonic plates shifted, continents tore apart, and new mountains rose. Volcanic provinces poured lava across the surface and released gases from deep in the mantle. Climate tilted toward heat or cold, rainfall patterns changed, and ecosystems began to wobble. Some species vanished, and the survivors spread into the empty spaces that remained. During this time, the planet's interior acted like a slow, irregular heartbeat. When supercontinents assembled, inland deserts expanded, and seasons became more extreme. When continents rifted, new coastlines, basins, and volcanic chains formed. Each pulse altered ocean circulation and atmospheric chemistry. As a result, droughts lengthened, wildfires expanded, and sudden chills followed major eruptions that filled the sky with ash and aerosols. These stresses worked as filters. Lineages that could store water, move long distances, or endure months of scarcity passed through. Others stopped at the bottleneck. Over time, repeated droughts favored dinosaurs with efficient lungs and air sacs that conserved moisture, with skins and scales that reduced water loss, and with behaviors that shifted feeding to cooler hours. In fire-prone landscapes, species that could move quickly, graze on regrowing plants, or shelter in burrows and floodplains had an advantage. Cold snaps and volcanic winters added another layer. Small theropods and early birds with feathers gained insulation, trapping body heat when temperatures fell. Some polar dinosaurs developed large eyes and fast metabolisms, allowing active lives during long polar nights. Because of this, feathers and high metabolic rates were not only for display or speed, they became tools for riding out sudden darkness and freezing conditions that followed major eruptions. Many of the strange dinosaur forms fit into this process. Ankylosaurs wrapped their bodies in armor and carried heavy clubtails, turning into low-slung bunkers against both predators and harsh, dusty environments. Sauropods evolved enormous necks and vast digestive systems, sweeping across wide areas to reach scattered vegetation and turning low-quality plants into steady energy. Even elaborate crests and frills could help regulate heat, release excess warmth, or signal within groups when habitats were fragmented and stressful. Crucially, these traits did not reset after each crisis. A lineage that survived one wave of volcanism carried its respiratory efficiency insulation, or armor into the next event. Over millions of years, resilience stacked. Dinosaurs that endured Triassic droughts entered the Jurassic already equipped for climatic swings, and those that passed through Jurassic disruptions entered the Cretaceous with an even deeper toolkit for survival. Seen in this way, dinosaur history becomes a long series of filters rather than a single rise and fall. The planet's shifting crust and mantle kept throwing new challenges at life, and certain groups learned to turn instability into their normal background. With this loop in mind, it is possible to examine individual survival architectures in detail. What happens when sheer size, deep guts, and towering necks meet a landscape of scarcity and heat? In the wake of repeated environmental shocks, one group of dinosaurs turned scarcity itself into their primary resource. Along the floodplains and semi-arid interiors of the continents, immense, long-necked forms moved slowly across the landscape. These were the sauropods, barrel-bodied giants with tiny heads, pillar-like limbs, and tails that balanced their great frames as they roamed in loose herds over vast distances. At first glance, their scale seems like a disadvantage in a stressed world. Huge bodies demand constant energy, and late Triassic and early Jurassic climates often swung between drought and flood. Yet sauropods were shaped by this instability. Their torsos housed enormous digestive systems that filled most of the body cavity. Inside, plant material did not simply pass through. It lingered in vast fermentation chambers where microbial communities broke down tough fibers that many other herbivores could not access. This process turned dry, low-quality vegetation into usable energy. Coarse conifer needles, horsetail stems, and fibrous ferns that covered floodplains and semi-desert margins became fuel rather than a limit. Because of this, sauropods were not tied to the richest patches of greenery. They could move through drought-prone regions where only hardy, stress-tolerant plants persisted, converting what was nearly inedible into new bone and muscle. Over time, this ability allowed them to dominate plant-based biomass in many ecosystems. Their body plan extended this strategy beyond the gut. The long neck, supported by air-filled vertebrae and strong ligaments, created a wide feeding envelope around each animal. Without shifting their heavy bodies, they could sweep arcs of foliage above, beside, and even below them, cropping leaves from different heights and plant types. In a single standing position, a sauropod could sample shrubs near the ground, mid-level branches, and higher crowns that other herbivores could not easily reach. This energy-efficient foraging mattered most during lean times. When rivers shrank and floodplains dried, moving the entire body required significant energy and water. A neck that did most of the searching, while the torso remained relatively still, reduced those costs. In combination with their fermenting guts, it meant that even scattered pockets of marginal plants could sustain a migrating herd as it crossed parched regions in search of better conditions. As a result, sauropods functioned as resilient specialists in landscapes under climatic stress. They could endure local collapses in plant quality that might starve more selective feeders, and their ability to travel long distances connected separated habitats into a broader survival network. When one valley failed, another might still hold enough conifers and ferns to keep their fermentation chambers active. During this time, Earth's crust and mantle continued to reshape continents and climate, but these giants treated shifting drought lines as movable boundaries rather than final limits. The next survival architecture would take a different path, trading height and fermenting depth for armor, low profiles, and a talent for enduring physical as well as environmental impact. The giants that carried those fermentation chambers were not just tall, they were living reservoirs. On a planet where Pangean seasons could swing from short, violent storms to long intervals of dryness, sheer size became a climate filter. A multi-ton sauropod lost water more slowly than the small animals moving around its feet. Its volume grew faster than its skin area, so heat and moisture escaped more gradually, buying time when the surface baked. When drought pressed across continents, this difference mattered. Smaller vertebrates could overheat or dehydrate in hours. A sauropod's massive body, deep lungs, and extensive blood volume buffered sudden temperature swings and brief losses of drinking water. Internal tissues warmed and cooled slowly. Because of this, these animals could walk farther under the same sun, reach the next river corridor, and survive the delay between one shrinking waterhole and the next storm front. Herding behavior amplified this resilience. Trackways from Jurassic and Cretaceous rocks show parallel sauropod footprints, with juveniles and adults traveling together. During this time, monsoon belts shifted north and south as the continents moved and as the planet's orbit altered seasonal contrasts. Herds that could migrate along these shifting rain bands, following greening floodplains and fresh fern growth, turned mobility into another survival tool. This process linked their life cycles to large-scale climate rhythms rather than to any single valley. Over time, some regions that hosted these herds also burned frequently. Charcoal fragments preserved in ancient floodplain sediments show that Jurassic and Cretaceous vegetation often dried enough to ignite under lightning strikes. Fires raced through conifer stands and fern prairies, leaving blackened stems and ash-rich soils. In such landscapes, a sauropod's strategy was not to hide from fire but to outlast its passage, then walk through the charred zone once flames died. Their height allowed them to browse surviving crowns of trees that still held needles and cones above the burn line. Later, when new growth sprouted in the open light, they could exploit fast-growing shoots that erupted from fire-adapted plants. As a result, burned areas became temporary feeding grounds rather than permanent losses. Even when local patches were erased, long limbs and efficient gaits let these animals step over fallen trunks and move on to the next regenerating basin. Long lifespans tied these advantages together. Many large dinosaurs likely lived for many decades, enduring repeated drought cycles, fires, and regional failures of vegetation. Their reproduction was slow but persistent. Clutches of eggs laid year after year with only a fraction surviving. Yet once a cohort reached adult size, it could span multiple bad years and still produce offspring when conditions improved. What did this mean over millions of years? Established lineages could contract into refuges, then expand again as climates shifted and new river systems formed. Not every herbivore solved the problem of survival by growing into a living tower. While sauropods relied on height, mass, and vast digestive capacity, another architecture took shape along the same crustal margins. Low to the ground, heavily armored, and built to turn direct impact into mere background noise. Low to the ground, heavily armored, and built to turn direct impact into background noise describes one strategy. Another began with a very different kind of challenge: eating what almost nothing else wanted. Imagine a menu made of dry twigs, resinous conifer needles, and tough, fibrous ferns. No soft leaves, no fruit, no seeds. Just abrasive, silica-laced plant material that would tear apart a human digestive system long before any energy was gained. This is where the sauropods changed the rules of survival. Instead of slicing and chewing, their teeth formed simple pegs and spatulas, well suited for stripping branches and raking foliage, but not for grinding. At first glance, this seems inefficient. How could such enormous animals live on food that was so resistant to digestion? The answer lay deeper in the body, in vast digestive chambers where microbial partners took over the work. Those microbes broke down cellulose and other complex plant tissues, turning indigestible matter into gases, fatty acids, and slow, steady energy. In modern ecosystems, large herbivores such as cows, deer, and antelope rely on microbial fermentation in multi-chambered stomachs or enlarged intestines. Elephants carry out a similar process in an extended hindgut. Sauropods pushed this fermenter strategy to an extreme scale. Their elongated torsos, barrel-shaped rib cages, and massive abdominal volumes created space for an enormous fermentation system. During this time, plant material could remain inside the body for very long periods, allowing microbes to extract energy that faster digestive systems would simply pass through. As a result, sauropods were able to treat harsh, low-quality vegetation as a reliable resource. In drought-stressed landscapes, when softer plants withered and more selective herbivores struggled, conifers, horsetails, and ferns often persisted as woody stems and needle-rich crowns. Because of this, a sauropod herd could continue feeding on what amounted to living thorns, converting landscapes of near famine into slow but continuous fuel. Over time, this process turned them into specialists in scarcity, not just giants of abundance. This ability carried clear survival advantages. When climates shifted, when fire swept through forests, or when volcanic events darkened the sky and damaged plant communities, many herbivores faced sudden losses in preferred food. Sauropods, already adapted to handle the toughest parts of the plant world, could ride out these disruptions by focusing on what remained. In regions along the margins of the great continents, where water and vegetation fluctuated with changing winds and monsoon systems, such resilience meant the difference between local extinction and persistence. Yet not every resilient dinosaur placed its bet inside the gut. While sauropods turned harsh plants into fuel, ankylosaurs followed another path, turning their own bodies into fortresses. Dense armor, low center of gravity, and robust organs adapted for dusty, abrasive environments allowed them to endure both predators and environmental stress. One lineage mastered the art of eating thorns. The other mastered the art of outlasting blows. Together, they hint that the next stages of dinosaur history would be defined not only by size or speed, but by how much punishment a body could absorb and still move forward. From that point, another lineage pushed the idea of a body built for punishment even further. These were the ankylosaurs, broad, low-slung herbivores whose entire form looked as if the planet had tried to turn bone into armor and then drape it over a moving tank. Their backs and flanks were covered with heavy bony plates called osteoderms, locked into the skin like a living pavement of rock. In many species, this armor did not stop at flat plates. Rows of spikes projected from the sides of the body, the neck, and sometimes even the tail. The skull was thick and low, with small openings and reinforced ridges. Under this shield, powerful limbs supported a wide torso that hugged the ground. In some ankylosaurs, the last vertebrae of the tail fused into a stiff handle, ending in a massive club of solid bone that could swing with tremendous force. This weapon was not symbolic. Biomechanical studies suggest that a well-aimed strike from an ankylosaur tail club could fracture the leg bones of a large predator. Because of this, a charging theropod faced not only armor that dulled its teeth, but also a counterblow capable of breaking its limbs. During this time, in predator-rich floodplains and coastal lowlands, such defenses changed the logic of survival for a heavy herbivore. Instead of fleeing at every shadow, ankylosaurs could remain relatively calm while feeding. Their armor reduced the need for rapid escape, allowing them to stand their ground, lower their heads, and keep cropping vegetation even as carnivores moved nearby. Over time, this strategy favored broad bodies, stable stances, and defensive reflexes rather than speed. The result was an animal that turned ambush into a risky choice for any attacker. Protection from teeth and claws was only part of the design. Fossil evidence from the chest cavity and ribs indicates that ankylosaurs carried large vaulted lungs and expansive body cavities. This process likely supported deep, efficient breathing, even when the air was filled with dust or ash. Some researchers infer that large livers and strong circulatory systems helped filter toxins and maintain stable internal chemistry under stressful conditions. These traits fit the environments in which many ankylosaurs lived. In arid basins, volcanic provinces, and regions downwind of active mountain belts, the air near the surface often carried fine particles. Ash from distant eruptions, smoke from wildfires, and dust from drying floodplains could linger for long periods. As a result, animals that inhaled close to the ground needed robust lungs and resilient tissues to endure repeated irritation. Their feeding style matched this theme of endurance. Ankylosaurs were low browsers, with mouths positioned close to the ground and jaws adapted to cropping tough fibrous plants. They likely fed on ferns, low shrubs, and hardy ground vegetation that could survive trampling, repeated fires, and drought-stressed soils. When taller forests thinned or burned, these near-surface plant communities often persisted as the last green layer. In this way, ankylosaurs were buffered against both ecological and climatic shocks. Even when landscapes shifted from wet to dry, or when fires swept across the crust of the continents, patches of low, resilient plants remained, and ankylosaurs were already shaped to use them. Their bodies were not only difficult to kill in a direct attack, their physiology and diet pointed toward a life adapted to dust storms, ash falls, and fluctuating climates. What happens when such survival architectures meet even more extreme swings in Earth's history, when darkness lengthens, deserts expand, and the mantle's restless heat rearranges oceans and continents yet again? When Earth's climate pushed toward its harsher limits, some dinosaurs did not rise up to meet the challenge. They sank down. Ankylosaurs turned survival into a low-lying strategy, pressed close to the surface, built to endure dust, ash, and cold rather than outrun it. What does life look like when the safest place is only a meter above the ground? In many regions, the margins of deserts spread across the continents. Semi-arid basins formed where rainfall weakened, soils cracked, and only scattered shrubs and low cycads clung to life. During this time, winds often picked up fine dust from dry riverbeds and floodplains, driving abrasive clouds close to the ground. A tall animal would have inhaled that dust directly, but ankylosaurs carried their heads low and forward, behind a broad, armored snout. Intricate nasal passages, folded and elongated within the skull, likely slowed and filtered incoming air. As a result, dust grains dropped out of the airstream, and the air reaching the lungs was cooler and cleaner than the storm outside. That same architecture helped in more sudden crises. Volcanic eruptions sent ash falling through forests, loading branches until they snapped and crashed down. Trees killed by drought or fire toppled in tangled chains, turning once open woodlands into chaotic barriers of trunks and limbs. Ankylosaurs met this not with speed, but with mass. Their heavy armor, fused plates, and bony knobs formed a kind of mobile shield against falling debris. When branches blocked the way, a broad muscular torso and powerful limbs could simply push through, levering aside obstacles that would trap lighter animals. Over time, this process turned devastated terrain into something navigable, at least for a living battering ram. Fossils of ankylosaurs are not limited to low-latitude, warm settings. Remains appear in higher latitude deposits, including regions that, in the Cretaceous, lay closer to the poles. These areas experienced cooler temperatures and long seasonal darkness, even when global climate was relatively warm. A low-slung body packed with tissue and encased in bone would have held heat well, acting as a kind of thermal mass. Slow metabolisms, combined with the ability to rest for long periods, may have allowed these animals to ride out cold snaps and months of dim light when plant growth nearly stopped. Their diet added another layer of resilience. Jaw shape, wear patterns on teeth, and the height of their snouts suggest generalist herbivory. Ankylosaurs could crop ferns close to the ground, bite through tough cycads, and browse low shrubs. When fire swept through, when ash falls buried some plants but spared others, or when drought shifted which species survived, this flexible feeding strategy meant that food rarely disappeared entirely. Because of this, local disturbances became changes in menu rather than absolute catastrophes. Taken together, ankylosaurs represent one extreme: slow armored endurance, tuned to a planet whose crust, mantle, and climate repeatedly rearranged habitats. Yet not all dinosaurs solved the problem of instability by becoming tanks. While these low-slung survivors pressed into the landscape, another branch moved in the opposite direction, becoming lighter, feathered, and hyperactive, built to surf rapid change instead of simply outlasting it. Those lighter bodies cast different shapes on the ground. Instead of armored silhouettes, the landscape held narrow feathered figures slipping between tree trunks and rock shadows. These were the small theropods, troodontids, dromaeosaurs, and their kin, built not to resist impact, but to avoid it. In many regions, they were lightly built, long-legged, and finely balanced. Sharp, recurved claws gripped bark, soil, and even ice-crusted ground. Their skulls were narrow and packed with large eyes, an arrangement that gathered scarce light along forest floors or under overcast volcanic skies. Around this frame, feathers formed a flexible coat. Filaments and veins wrapped the head, torso, and tail, turning brittle reptilian outlines into insulated, windbreaking forms. Feathers did more than decorate these animals. They trapped a layer of air close to the skin, slowing the loss of body heat into cold night air or chilled ground. Combined with high metabolisms that burned food quickly, this insulation allowed small theropods to stay active when temperatures dropped. During this time, when eruptions dimmed the sun or seasons pushed high-latitude regions into extended twilight, such warmth became a decisive advantage. Over time, lineages that could remain alert and mobile in the cold were more likely to find food, mates, and shelter, while less adaptable neighbors fell silent. Because of this physiological edge, feathered theropods could push into marginal spaces. They hunted along mountain slopes, where thin air and lower temperatures challenged larger, slower-breathing dinosaurs. In disturbed valleys after eruptions or fires, they crossed ash-covered ground, while the planet's surface still carried the chill of volcanic winters. This process of repeatedly entering and exploiting harsh zones turned them into specialists in instability. Their diets mirrored this flexibility. Many small theropods possessed sharp, finely serrated teeth, suited for seizing small vertebrates, from lizards to juvenile dinosaurs. Others took insects, snails, and other invertebrates, probing rotting wood or leaf litter. Some likely scavenged carrion, shaving meat from carcasses left by larger predators. There is even evidence that certain forms sampled plant material, seeds, or fruits when animal prey was scarce. As a result, they could move through patchy landscapes, taking whatever the disrupted ecosystem briefly offered. Fast reproduction added another layer of resilience. Small bodies meant shorter growth times and, likely, more frequent clutches of eggs. Many species built nests, arranged eggs carefully, and may have guarded them in groups. Social hunting, or at least coordinated foraging, has been proposed for some dromaeosaurs, whose anatomy hints at agility and communication. After local crashes, such behaviors allowed populations to rebound quickly, filling empty habitats before slower breeding dinosaurs returned. In this way, these feathered shadows slipped through environmental cracks. When continents heaved, climates lurched, and the crust and mantle conspired to rearrange habitats. Larger, more specialized dinosaurs struggled to track stable food and warmth. Small theropods instead followed edges, forest margins, riverbanks, uplands, and ash plains, persisting as a fine, living mesh across the planet. In the next phase of this history, descendants of these lineages would carry this survival architecture even further, lifting it into the air itself. Those feathered shadows did not only follow rivers and ash plains. Some lineages carried this survival mesh into places that seem almost impossible for large reptiles. Forests that lay within the ancient Antarctic Circle, where the sky itself changed character. In these high southern latitudes, during the Cretaceous, the sun became another seasonal resource, not a constant presence. At certain times of the year, the polar regions of Earth entered a strange mode. For months, the sun would skim low and never truly set, turning the surface into a realm of long twilight and shallow night. Then the pattern would reverse. The sun would disappear below the horizon for weeks to months, leaving the landscape in extended darkness while cold seeped through the soils and rivers. What would it mean for a dinosaur to live an entire life inside this slow cycle of light and shadow? Cretaceous Australia, positioned far south, held such environments. There, along river plains and conifer forests, small ornithopods such as Ankylosaurs moved through the undergrowth. This animal carried proportionally large eyes, set in a skull adapted for gathering scarce light. During this time of polar nights, those eyes, combined with an active, likely warm-blooded metabolism, would have allowed steady foraging under dim skies when photosynthesis nearly paused and many plants dropped into metabolic conservation. Survival in these regions depended on more than vision. Feathered or filamentous insulation, high internal heat production, and constant motion formed a linked strategy. Instead of migrating thousands of kilometers with each seasonal shift, many polar dinosaurs appear to have stayed in place, relying on dense coverings, muscular activity, and flexible diets. This process of retaining heat, seeking buried plant material, scavenging, or hunting small prey would have turned the long winter into a period of slowed but continuous activity, rather than complete shutdown. Because of this, the lives of these dinosaurs parallel those of modern polar animals. Today, penguins, caribou, and Arctic foxes endure months of scarcity and cold by combining insulation with behavioral flexibility, shifting between feeding modes, movement patterns, and social behaviors as conditions change. Small theropods with feathers, sharp senses, and rapid metabolisms followed a similar rule set. Insulation plus adaptable behavior equaled survival in environments that swung between brief abundance and long deprivation. This polar pattern interrupt shows that deserts were not the only testing ground for resilience. Over time, dinosaur lineages spread from arid interiors to coastal swamps and then into high-latitude forests that experienced extreme light cycles. As a result, drought, darkness, and cold became recurring features of their evolutionary history, not singular disasters. From superheated interiors to months-long night, Earth repeatedly reshaped the boundaries of habitability, and dinosaurs repeatedly treated those boundaries as seasonal challenges rather than final limits. The next environments in this history would push that endurance in yet another direction, into lands where wind, altitude, and thin air imposed their own demands. In the middle of the Mesozoic, those windswept uplands and thin air plateaus were only one part of a larger rearrangement. During this time, Earth's single great landmass was breaking apart. The supercontinent Pangaea began to open along deep fractures in the crust, and new ocean basins formed as molten rock rose from the mantle to build spreading ridges on the seafloor. As these oceans widened, coastlines changed shape and position. Long, straight continental margins gave way to intricate bays, inland seas, and narrowing isthmuses. This process altered how heat and moisture moved around the planet. Warm water flowed into high latitudes, while new mountain chains and rift valleys redirected winds. As a result, some regions experienced more frequent, moisture-laden storms, while others fell into the rain shadow of rising ranges and became increasingly dry. The outcome was a patchwork Earth, rather than a single, predictable climate belt. Broad deserts persisted in the interior of some continents, with shifting dunes and sparse vegetation. Elsewhere, humid coastal plains supported fern prairies and conifer thickets, crossed by large rivers that flooded their banks. In higher terrains, upland forests formed cooler refuges, with shorter growing seasons and thinner air. Dinosaurs dispersed across this mosaic, tracking food, nesting sites, and tolerable temperatures as continents drifted apart. Their survival architectures did not vanish, they were redeployed. Long-necked sauropods carried their fermentation chambers into both semi-arid basins and lush lowlands, using vast guts and slow, efficient digestion to process tough conifer needles, cycads, and other fibrous plants. Ankylosaurs extended their low-slung, armored bodies into floodplains and dry uplands alike, using heavy armor and strong lungs to endure predators, dust, and seasonal shortages. Small feathered theropods, insulated against cold and heat alike, moved through forest edges and river margins, their feathers buffering temperature swings and perhaps shedding rain and snow. Over time, these familiar designs appeared in unfamiliar combinations. A desert margin might hold sauropods and ankylosaurs together, with feathered predators weaving between them. A coastal forest might support lightly built plant eaters under the same canopy as heavy shielded forms. The strategies were ancient, but the stage sets kept changing. Did this constant reshuffling help certain lineages become even more flexible in the face of later crises? Meanwhile, the plant world was undergoing its own quiet revolution. In the early Cretaceous, flowering plants appeared and began to spread. At first, they were minor components among conifers, ginkgos, and cycads, but their rapid growth, varied leaves, and nutrient-rich tissues gradually altered plant communities. Herbivorous dinosaurs that had evolved to grind or ferment tough, resinous foliage now encountered softer, more diverse vegetation. Because of this, some groups developed more complex teeth, stronger jaws, or adjusted gut microbiomes to handle new chemical defenses and richer foods. This botanical shift unfolded while Earth's long climate cycles continued in the background. Sea levels rose and fell as mid-ocean ridges swelled and cooled. Volcanic provinces erupted along rifts, and greenhouse pulses alternated with cooler intervals. These same dinosaurs, adapted to a fractured world and changing plants, would soon face intensified volcanism, expanding seaways, and, at the end, a very different kind of night. What happens when even the most resilient architectures meet a boundary they cannot treat as just another season? When climates swung toward dryness, entire regions of the planet shifted toward sand and stone. Imagine a landscape where the horizon is broken not by forests, but by dune fields, rocky plateaus, and the pale threads of rivers that only flow after rare storms. During this time, parts of Cretaceous Earth looked strikingly similar to the modern Sahara or the American Southwest. These deserts and semi-deserts formed where continents lay beneath descending dry air and far from stabilizing oceans. Vast dune seas migrated across the surface. Between them, ephemeral rivers carved shallow channels that might run with water for only days each year. On higher ground, stony plateaus baked under intense sunlight, their thin soils supporting low, tough plants and scattered groves along seasonal floodplains. Yet even in these harsh regions, dinosaurs adapted and persisted. Some abelosaurid theropods and certain hadrosaurs are found in sediments that record arid and semi-arid conditions. Their bones hint at bodies that may have carried thick, perhaps more leathery skin, reducing water loss through evaporation. High-set nostrils and complex nasal passages, suggested by skull anatomy in several lineages, would have allowed air to be cooled and moistened as it moved in and out, helping conserve precious internal water. As a result, every breath could be managed like a resource. Anatomy alone was not enough. Behavior shaped survival as much as bone and tissue. Many desert-adapted animals on modern Earth avoid the worst heat by becoming nocturnal or crepuscular. It is likely that some dinosaurs in these environments did the same, moving most at dawn, dusk, or under starlight. Others may have rested in the shade of cliffs or low vegetation, or even used shallow burrows or scrapes to reach slightly cooler ground. This process of timing activity to the daily temperature cycle would have reduced overheating and slowed the constant drain of water. Movement across the landscape was another critical adaptation. Waterholes and patches of vegetation were often scattered and temporary. Long legs, narrow feet, and efficient gaits allowed many dinosaurs to travel great distances between these islands of habitability. Because of this, herds could track shifting resources, following storm belts or retreating toward more reliable rivers when local pools dried. Over time, such mobility turned the desert from a trap into a network of routes. These desert wanderers were more than regional specialists. They were resilience experiments written into bone and behavior. In a Cretaceous world where seaways advanced and retreated, and where volcanic pulses could shift rainfall belts, lineages already comfortable with aridity carried a built-in buffer against prolonged droughts and regional drying. When other communities collapsed around shrinking lakes and failing forests, these travelers of sand and stone could endure a little longer. What happens when such drought-hardened designs meet not just shifting climate zones, but sudden darkness and global chill? When drought-hardened designs met sudden darkness and global chill, not all of them stayed in the lowlands. Some lineages had already explored a different kind of refuge, the high ground. During this time, parts of Pangaea's were being pushed upward as plates collided, crust thickened, and ancient mountain belts were rejuvenated by deep forces in the mantle. As continents shifted, long ridges and broad plateaus formed across the interior of the supercontinent. This process lifted wide regions thousands of meters above sea level. Air became thinner, temperatures dropped, and conditions differed sharply from the hot floodplains and coastal swamps below. Because of this vertical relief, the same latitude could host humid lowland forests, dry basins, and cool upland meadows stacked on top of one another, creating a three-dimensional landscape for dinosaurs to explore. Direct fossils from these uplands are rare because high areas tend to erode rather than preserve sediments. Yet scattered clues remain. Trackways found in what were once elevated basins, fragmentary bones in coarse river gravels, and isolated teeth in plateau deposits all hint that dinosaur herds and hunters moved through these regions. In some cases, the rock record shows small-bodied ornithischians and theropods leaving repeated track layers on what were once high river terraces. Did they live there permanently or pass through seasonally as conditions shifted below? High-altitude habitats would have demanded particular physiological strengths. Thinner air meant less oxygen with each breath, while colder nights increased the need to conserve heat. Many theropods already possessed bird-like lungs with unidirectional airflow, and sauropods carried vast air sacs through their bodies, lightening their skeletons and enhancing breathing efficiency. Over time, lineages with such traits could have tolerated upland conditions more easily, using efficient circulatory systems to keep muscles supplied even when oxygen levels dropped. Seasonality also intensified with height. Upland environments likely experienced sharper temperature swings, stronger frosts, and shorter growing seasons than nearby lowlands. Herbivores feeding there may have relied on tough, slow-growing plants adapted to thin soils, while predators tracked migrations along mountain corridors. As a result, these communities would have been accustomed to scarcity, irregular weather, and rapid shifts between abundance and stress. In crisis, that experience mattered. When lowland rivers burst their banks, when floodplains turned to mud-choked wetlands, or when heat waves baked coastal plains, uplands could act as refuges. Cooler temperatures, better drainage, and more isolated basins may have reduced disease spread and buffered extreme climate events. Lineages already comfortable with steep slopes, thin air, and patchy resources carried yet another layer of resilience written into their bones and lungs. From deserts to mountains to polar forests, dinosaurs gradually occupied nearly every terrestrial niche the planet's surface could offer. Yet even these high-ground strategies could not detach them from deeper planetary rhythms. The same tectonic forces that raised plateaus fed long chains of volcanoes, and the same shifting continents that opened new habitats also steered ocean currents and climate toward future upheavals. What happened when these quiet, slow cycles suddenly accelerated? When those slow cycles sped up, the change often began deep within Earth's mantle. Vast provinces of magma rose toward the crust, feeding chains of volcanoes that did more than build mountains. During this time, some eruptions were large enough to inject huge quantities of ash and sulfur-rich aerosols high into the stratosphere. Once there, These particles spread around the planet, dimming sunlight and turning ordinary seasons into volcanic winters. In such intervals, the surface cooled quickly while the deep interior remained hot. Sunlight reaching the ground could drop by tens of %. Days became dim and hazy. Photosynthesis stalled across continents as plants received less light and colder air. Over time, forests thinned, fern fields browned, and plankton in the oceans declined. This process did not always last for decades, but even a few months to a few years of weakened plant growth could send shockwaves through entire food webs. When plant production faltered, the first link in the chain failed. Herbivores found less to eat, and predators hunting those herbivores began to starve as well. Animals with narrow diets or very high energy demands were at particular risk. Fast-growing species that depended on constant, rich vegetation, or carnivores tied to a single type of prey, were suddenly exposed. Because of this, volcanic winters acted as filters, quietly favoring organisms that could stretch resources, slow their metabolisms, or switch foods. Among dinosaurs, certain survival architectures handled these crises better than others. Small feathered theropods carried insulating coats that trapped body heat, allowing them to remain active in colder air and under dim skies. Many were opportunistic feeders, capable of hunting insects, scavenging carcasses, or taking seeds and small vertebrates when larger prey vanished. As a result, they could bridge the gap between normal seasons and the gradual return of plant growth more effectively than large specialized hunters. Large herbivores followed a different path through the same bottleneck. Sauropods and other massive plant eaters stored energy in their great bulk and maintained complex fermenting guts. These digestive systems extracted maximum calories from tough, low-quality plant material, such as woody branches and coarse ferns that survived the chill. Their size allowed them to travel long distances across the surface in search of scattered greenery, while their slow metabolisms let them endure lean years that might kill smaller, more delicate forms. Each volcanic winter functioned as a stress test. Lineages that could not handle abrupt cold, darkness, or dietary shifts tended to disappear, while those with flexible bodies and behaviors persisted. Over time, repeated episodes pruned the dinosaur family tree, trimming fragile branches and reinforcing clades with robust, adaptable designs. It is easy to imagine a single catastrophe ending an era. But what happens when a group has already survived several? By the late Cretaceous, many dinosaur groups were veterans of such trials. Generations had passed through cycles of sudden cooling, failed growing seasons, and slow recoveries. Their evolutionary history contained deep experience with famine, shifting climates, and disrupted skies. This long preparation would shape how different lineages faced the next, far greater disturbance that arrived from beyond the planet entirely. Across the planet, some of the harshest training grounds lay far from deserts or lava fields. They lay near the poles, where the sun itself vanished for months. During this time in the Cretaceous, high-latitude regions were milder than today, held above deep freeze by greenhouse gases and redistributed ocean heat. Yet they still entered long seasons of dim light, chill air, and lingering snow. These polar lands were not barren ice sheets. Instead, dense conifer stands, ginkgo groves, and deciduous forests formed closed canopies across river plains and low hills. Trees grew under long, pale summers when the sun barely dipped below the horizon, then shut down through extended twilight winters when true daylight disappeared. Over time, this process selected plants that could drop leaves, slow their metabolism, and store energy in roots and trunks, waiting out the darkness, much as modern high-latitude forests do. Within these shadowed woods, entire dinosaur communities lived year-round. Fossil sites in what is now Antarctica and southern Australia, then positioned near or within the Antarctic Circle, preserve small herbivores such as Leia Alinosaura, alongside larger plant eaters and nimble theropods. Bone beds, trackways, and the ages of individuals indicate resident populations rather than brief visitors. Instead of migrating thousands of kilometers, many lineages accepted the polar cycle as normal climate, raising young and feeding under months of low-angle light. Evidence from their skeletons shows how they endured this demanding regime. Growth rings in bones and teeth record seasonal stress with slower deposition during the dark months. Yet these rings do not show a complete stop. As a result, researchers infer that these animals did not simply hibernate in deep torpor. They continued to move, forage, and grow, even when plant productivity fell and temperatures dropped, surviving on stored fat, evergreen foliage, bark, and whatever else the forest still offered. To function through such extended nights, insulation and physiology became critical. Many small theropods carried feathered coats that trapped body heat, while larger herbivores likely relied on bulk, muscular activity, and perhaps partial feathering or thick skin. Elevated metabolisms would have helped maintain active brains and muscles in the cold. Social behavior, such as grouping for shared warmth, coordinated foraging, or communal sheltering among trees and riverbanks, may have further stabilized these communities when light was scarce. Because of this, polar dinosaurs represent some of the most resilient architectures produced during dinosaur history. They normalized conditions that would resemble an endless winter to modern humans. A volcanic dust veil over mid-latitude continents might darken skies for a few seasons. For these lineages, short volcanic winters elsewhere would have mirrored the familiar polar night. Their survival strategies show how far life on Earth can stretch its tolerances. Yet even these specialists, trained by recurring darkness, would eventually face a night unlike any they had known. A sudden winter from space that did not end on schedule. On other parts of the supercontinent, darkness was not the only recurring threat. Millions of years ago, broad lowlands along dinosaur rivers faced a different kind of catastrophe: fire. Imagine a flat green world that for part of the year was soaked and muddy, and for the rest, baked into a dry, flammable plain waiting for a spark. During this time, many Mesozoic floodplains followed a strict seasonal rhythm. Monsoon rains spread water and silt across the surface, building fertile layers much like the great river systems of later Earth. Then the rain shifted away. Under a high sun and continental heat, grasses had not yet formed, but ferns, horsetails, and low shrubs dried out. When lightning storms returned, bolts struck this withered plant cover. Whole corridors along the rivers could ignite. Wildfire in these systems did not only destroy, it also reset. Flames raced through accumulated litter, consuming old stems and fallen branches, and releasing nutrients back into the soil. Ash settled as a fine gray blanket. Over time, this process opened patches in forests, let in more light, and triggered flushes of new growth that rooted into the freshly enriched crust. Because of this, fire became part of a repeating cycle rather than a rare disaster. Herbivorous dinosaurs were not passive victims in this landscape. Low-browsing ankylosaurs and stegosaurs, with their heads close to the ground, were well placed to exploit the first plants that returned after a burn. Resilient ferns could resprout from underground stems, and fire-tolerant shrubs sent up tender shoots through the ash. Large sauropods, moving on long columnar limbs, could step over fallen trunks and enter these open zones quickly. In the smoky silence after a fire, these animals walked into nearly empty feeding grounds. Their bodies also carried a kind of protection against the hazards of such worlds. Ankylosaurs were wrapped in bony plates and knobs that did more than resist teeth. Falling branches, rolling debris, and even small rock fragments dislodged by heat had to pass this armor before reaching vital organs. Stegosaurs, with tall dorsal plates and muscular tails, presented a thick, elevated profile that could deflect impacts from above. At a distance from the flames, their size meant that radiant heat reached skin and bone more slowly than in smaller creatures. Did this give them precious extra minutes to move away from the fire line? Sauropods, towering over many trees, may have used their height to scan for smoke columns and choose escape paths along river channels or already burned patches. Ash-covered ground could be harsh, but their broad feet spread weight, reducing sinking into unstable sediments. As a result, some of the very features that protected them from predators also helped them navigate collapsing, fire-damaged forests. In landscapes where ignition was inevitable, resilience meant timing. Herbivores that could survive the passage of flames, then rapidly occupy the blackened mosaic, turned fire into a predictable season. Each burn opened windows of rich forage with little competition. These armored and giant lineages did not merely endure the fire plains, they folded them into their annual cycle. The same capacity to turn disturbance into opportunity would matter again when the planet delivered even larger shocks, from regional lava outpourings to the final winter from space that followed. By the late Cretaceous, that hard-earned resilience played out on a very different stage. Millions of years after the fire plains of the earlier Mesozoic, Earth's continents had spread apart, coastlines had multiplied, and the planet supported some of the most complex ecosystems in its history. Forests, floodplains, inland seas, and polar woodlands all carried their own specialized communities of dinosaurs and plants. During this time, flowering plants had spread across many landscapes. They formed dense undergrowth in forests, patchy meadows on uplands, and intricate wetland margins along rivers and lakes. This process reshaped food webs. Insects diversified to exploit nectar and leaves. Small herbivorous dinosaurs and early birds tracked seeds and fruits, and large plant eaters shifted their feeding to new types of foliage. As a result, late Cretaceous communities were layered and productive, with energy moving through many channels rather than a few simple pathways. Separated continents helped drive this diversification. North America, Eurasia, South America, Africa, India, and Antarctica all carried their own distinctive dinosaur faunas, yet similar ecological roles appeared again and again. Hadrosaurs with broad grinding beaks occupied floodplains on several continents. Ceratopsians dominated some northern landmasses, while heavily armored ankylosaurs browsed low vegetation in many regions. Small theropods, often feathered and agile, hunted insects, small vertebrates, and sometimes scavenged along river margins. At the same time, the planet itself was far from static. Plate motions continued to rearrange oceans and land, opening new basins and closing others. In North America, a shallow inland sea flooded the central part of the continent, turning former lowlands into marine environments and pushing terrestrial habitats toward narrow coastal plains and upland belts. Elsewhere, slow uplift and changing ocean currents produced regional cooling trends, especially at higher latitudes. Over time, sea levels rose and fell, shorelines shifted, and climate belts migrated. Dinosaur populations responded by tracking suitable habitats along these moving gradients. Lineages that could adjust their range, diet, and behavior were favored. Generalist hadrosaurs grazed both soft aquatic plants and tougher upland vegetation. Ceratopsians alternated between coastal plains and interior basins as conditions allowed. Small theropods exploited forest edges, river corridors, and even polar forests, some enduring long polar nights in high-latitude regions. Because of this constant background change, many late Cretaceous dinosaurs show signs of ecological versatility. Widespread distribution, varied tooth shapes, and evidence of different feeding heights all point to flexible survival architectures rather than narrow specialization. In effect, dinosaur faunas were already living on a planet that tested them with slow, persistent environmental pressure instead of sudden catastrophe. This quiet tension is important. It shows that the final generations of non-avian dinosaurs were not fragile relics waiting to vanish. They were active participants in a dynamic Earth, buffered by traits that had carried their ancestors through earlier upheavals. Yet, Beyond the familiar rhythm of rising seas, drifting continents, and shifting climate zones, another influence was on approach. It did not come from the mantle or the gradual wandering of plates. It fell from far outside the planet, and it would turn even these resilient designs into a brief, flickering experiment. It is worth pausing here and asking a simple question. What exactly had these animals already endured before that object from space arrived? For more than 160 million years, the main threats came from within the planet itself. Rising plumes of mantle heat drove volcanic outbursts. Continents shifted, collided, and tore apart. Sea levels advanced and retreated across the edges of the crust. Climate zones wandered from pole to equator and back again. During this time, dinosaurs survived intense volcanic provinces that released vast amounts of gas into the atmosphere. They persisted through greenhouse intervals when tropical belts expanded, and through cooler phases when polar regions grew harsher. As continents broke and reassembled, coastlines changed shape, ocean currents reorganized, and habitats were fragmented. This process produced droughts in interior deserts, new mountain chains, and periodic ecological bottlenecks. Yet dinosaur lineages repeatedly passed through these narrow gates. Because of this, many groups evolved what could be called resilience architectures. Ankylosaurs carried dense armor over low, compact bodies, well-suited to dusty, disturbed landscapes where predators and flying debris were constant threats. Sauropods developed enormous guts and long necks that allowed them to process tough, low-quality plants scattered across floodplains or dry seasonal environments. Small feathered theropods, including early birds, wrapped themselves in insulating plumage and maintained high metabolisms, enabling survival in cold snaps, volcanic winters, and even polar darkness. All of these designs were tuned to stresses that, while severe, were still part of Earth's recurring patterns. Volcanic eruptions, even large ones, tended to build in stages. Climate shifts unfolded over thousands to millions of years. Sea level changes rose and fell over similarly extended intervals. Over time, ecosystems could track these changes, with species migrating, adapting, or radiating into new niches as older forms vanished. The Chicxulub impact did not follow that script. It was not a pulse from the mantle or a slow rearrangement of plates, but a sudden external blow. In a fraction of a day, an asteroid delivered energy far beyond that of typical volcanic episodes, excavating a deep crater in the crust and sending vaporized rock high above the atmosphere. Shockwaves, global wildfires, and tsunamis arrived almost immediately. Then, over months to years, dust, soot, and aerosols dimmed sunlight, disrupting photosynthesis and plunging climates into an unpredictable, impact-driven winter. Resilience architectures built for cyclical hardship were not designed for this combination of instant devastation and long-term light loss. Armor could not stop a firestorm. A large gut was a liability when plant productivity collapsed. Even insulation was only useful where some food remained on the surface. Yet some small feathered flexible lineages did survive. Certain birds with their rapid reproduction, varied diets, and flight threaded this narrow needle by exploiting scattered resources in a shattered landscape. In this sense, the end Cretaceous event does not mark a simple failure of dinosaur resilience. It marks a boundary condition in Earth's history, a reminder that some catastrophes exceed even the best adapted designs. The next step is to examine how life reorganized beyond that boundary, and how the surviving branches of this ancient dynasty reshaped the planet that followed. In the final days of the Cretaceous, that boundary condition arrived from space. Around 66 million years ago, a roughly 10-kilometer-wide asteroid struck the shallow seas, fringing what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. In a fraction of a second, the kinetic energy of the impact released more power than billions of nuclear weapons. The crust and upper mantle at the site were violently displaced. Rock and seawater flashed into vapor. A transient cavity tens of kilometers deep formed and then collapsed, sending shockwaves through the planet's surface. This impact did not remain a local event. As the seafloor and overlying water were displaced, enormous tsunamis raced outward across the Proto-Gulf of Mexico and beyond. Coastal plains that had supported rich dinosaur ecosystems were suddenly inundated. At the same time, pulverized rock, droplets of molten glass, and vaporized sulfate-rich sediments were blasted high above the atmosphere. During this time, fragments of that ejecta began to fall back through the sky all around Earth. As those particles re-entered, they compressed the air in front of them and generated intense heat. For a short interval, the upper atmosphere glowed with infrared radiation. Forests and open plains far from the crater ignited. Charcoal in boundary layer sediments records this brief global firestorm. Many dinosaurs that had survived droughts, cold snaps, and volcanic winters now faced landscapes where vegetation burned on a continental scale. Yet the most severe challenge was still to come. Over time, the fine dust and sulfate aerosols from the impact spread through the stratosphere. Sunlight reaching the surface declined sharply. Days dimmed to a long twilight that persisted for months and perhaps for several years in some regions. This process interrupted photosynthesis across both land and ocean. Plants withered. Plankton populations in the surface oceans collapsed. Because of this disruption at the base of the food web, herbivorous dinosaurs lost their primary food sources, and the large predators that depended on them soon followed. Large-bodied animals are particularly vulnerable to sustained famine. Many dinosaur lineages had endured short volcanic winters, regional wildfires, and shifting coastlines. Some polar forms were adapted to long seasonal darkness and cold. However, a global, multi-year interval of reduced sunlight and primary productivity exceeded their adaptive capacity. The very size and energy demands that had once been advantageous on a productive planet now became liabilities. In contrast, survival favored small, flexible organisms. Seed-eating, feathered birds, along with many mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, could retreat into sheltered microhabitats such as burrows, forest litter, or protected wetlands. Omnivorous diets allowed them to exploit seeds, decaying plant material, insect communities, and carcasses that persisted even as green vegetation vanished. Some bird lineages, insulated by feathers and supported by high metabolisms, could endure cold, low-light conditions while feeding on durable food sources like buried seeds. The impact night thus revealed a hard limit. It showed that even lineages refined by earlier crises could be outmatched when the entire planet's energy flow was throttled at its source. The next step is to trace how life rebuilt new food webs from these scattered survivors, and how the descendants of small feathered dinosaurs eventually reshaped Earth's recovering ecosystems. In the dim aftermath of the impact night, another realization emerges. The dinosaurs did not entirely disappear. Millions of years ago, while large bodies and slow life cycles vanished, a different legacy took flight. Birds represent a surviving branch of the dinosaur family tree, descended from small feathered theropods that had already been shaped by earlier crises in Earth's history. These early birdline relatives were not fragile ornaments on the Mesozoic landscape. They possessed high metabolisms that generated internal heat, feather insulation that trapped it near the surface of the body, and flexible diets that ranged from insects and small vertebrates to seeds and plant material. Over time, this combination formed a compact survival architecture. It linked warm-blooded physiology, light skeletons, and complex lungs with agile movement on through forests, shorelines, and floodplains on changing continents. When the asteroid struck, those traits became critical. Small body size meant that many early birds needed less food and could hide in sheltered microhabitats. Rapid reproduction allowed populations to rebound quickly when conditions briefly improved. Because of this, some lineages could endure the long interval of darkness and famine that followed, feeding on seeds buried in ash, scavenging insect pockets in rotting wood, and tracking the last remnants of decaying plant matter while larger dinosaurs starved. Many modern bird behaviors still echo these ancient strategies. Seed-eating species mirror ancestors that relied on durable plant material capable of surviving fires, droughts, and cold snaps. Insect-foraging birds recall feathered hunters that once searched under bark, leaf litter, and riverbank sediments. Flocking behavior, with groups moving together across the landscape, reflects a long tradition of collective vigilance and shared information in unstable environments. Long-distance movement, whether in full migration or more modest seasonal shifts, extends a habit of following shifting climate belts and patchy resources across the changing surface of the planet. Seen in this light, birds are not a separate invention, but a continuation. The same survival architectures that helped dinosaurs withstand Triassic droughts, Jurassic volcanic winters, and Cretaceous polar nights were repurposed in smaller, lighter bodies. During this time, traits such as endothermy, feather insulation, and versatile feeding did not simply vanish with the last non-avian dinosaur. Instead, this process carried them forward into a new atmospheric regime and a reorganized biosphere. As a result, when the age of large dinosaur herbivores and predators ended, the stage did not empty. It changed. Birds and mammals stepped into ecological spaces that had once been held by giant sauropods, ankylosaurs, and theropods. But the deeper patterns of resilience remained. What new forms would these inheritors explore in the quieter yet still restless chapters of Earth's recovering ecosystems? In the wider history of the planet, the rise and fall of dinosaurs was one chapter in a repeating pattern. Over hundreds of millions of years, Earth's continents have not been fixed. They have slowly converged into giant supercontinents and then rifted apart again. This long rhythm, known as the supercontinent cycle, has helped to set the stage for both disaster and renewal. When a supercontinent, such as Pangaea, formed, the arrangement of land and ocean changed the entire system. Vast interiors of land became isolated from moisture-bearing winds. Deserts expanded across the surface. At the same time, collisions between continents crumpled the crust and raised enormous mountain belts. This process increased erosion, altered atmospheric circulation, and focused volcanic activity along long collision zones. Over time, the same forces that built a supercontinent also began to weaken it. Heat rising from the mantle collected beneath the thickened crust. Rifts opened, lava flooded out, and new ocean basins formed. As continents separated, new coastlines and broad shallow seas developed. These young margins created humid climates, complex shorelines, and many new ecological gradients. As a result, environments that had once been dominated by dry interiors were replaced by mosaics of wetlands, deltas, and marine shelves. Life did not pass through these transitions gently. Many of the largest mass extinctions in Earth's history were linked to phases of the supercontinent cycle. When Pangaea was assembling, and later when it began to break apart, immense volcanic provinces released carbon dioxide, methane, and aerosols. Oceans warmed, then stagnated, and sometimes became oxygen poor. Forests burned or vanished. During this time, the organisms that survived were often those already adapted to extremes or possessing flexible survival architectures. The end Permian extinction, at the close of the Paleozoic, erased most known species, but it also cleared ecological space. In the Triassic world that followed, early dinosaurs were small, lightly built, and able to move across harsh, open landscapes. Because of this combination of mobility and metabolic flexibility, they could exploit patchy resources in the stressed interiors of Pangaea. Later, after another crisis at the Triassic-Jurassic boundary, dinosaur lineages again expanded into newly available habitats along fresh rift basins and young coasts. Their story ended at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, when another interval of volcanism and a large impact disrupted climate, oceans, and food webs. Yet even this was not an exception to the larger rhythm. Birds, as surviving dinosaurs, and mammals, as long-standing small survivors, inherited a planet entering a new phase of continental separation and climatic adjustment. Modern continents, climates, and ecosystems belong to the same cycle. Plate motions continue, mountains rise, and rifts slowly widen beneath familiar seas. The traits that foster resilience today, tolerance of heat and drought, flexibility in diet, and the ability to endure environmental swings, echo solutions tested in deep time. What forms of life are quietly preparing for the planet's next great rearrangement? And how different might the world look when the next supercontinent gathers its scattered lands together? In the modern world, distant echoes of those ancient survival architectures still move across the planet's surface. The same basic solutions that once carried dinosaurs through drought, cold, and volcanic darkness now appear in grazing herds, armored mammals, and small, restless birds that patrol fractured landscapes. Resilience did not vanish with the last non-avian dinosaur. It shifted form and continued through other lineages. Large herbivores provide one of the clearest links. Sauropods relied on vast fermentation chambers to process low-quality foliage, turning dry, fibrous plants into steady energy. Today, ruminants such as cattle, antelope, and deer use a similar internal strategy. Multiple stomach chambers and complex microbial communities allow them to live on grasses and leaves that many animals cannot use. During this time of shifting climates and expanding dry zones, these grazers help stabilize ecosystems by keeping energy flowing through food webs, even when plant quality declines. This process acts as a biological buffer. When drought withers high-nutrient plants, animals with advanced fermentation can still extract value from tough stems and scrub. Because of this, large herbivores can maintain body condition, disperse seeds, and support predators through lean years. Over time, landscapes with such generalist processors tend to recover more quickly after fires, frosts, or human disturbance, just as sauropod-dominated systems once absorbed environmental shocks across ancient continents. Another echo appears in armor and posture. Ankylosaurs combined heavy bony plates, a low-slung body, and powerful limbs to prioritize endurance and defense over speed. On modern Earth, armadillos, pangolins, and some heavily scaled reptiles follow the same design logic. They invest in protective coverings, compact bodies, and behaviors that reduce exposure rather than in rapid flight. In harsh environments where predators, debris, and sudden temperature shifts are common, surviving the impact often matters more than avoiding it entirely. Small feathered theropods, with their insulation and flexible diets, find their reflection in modern generalist birds and mammals that thrive in disturbed habitats. Crows, pigeons, foxes, and many songbirds occupy urban areas, secondary forests, and post-fire landscapes. They switch foods readily, nest in varied structures, and move quickly into newly opened spaces. What looks like opportunism is really a deep time strategy. Treat disturbance not as catastrophe, but as an opening. Across all these examples, a pattern emerges. Resilience rarely comes from a single perfect blueprint. It arises from diversity within a group. Some lineages specialize tightly in one food, climate, or behavior, while others remain broad generalists. When crises arrive, it is often those generalists that bridge the gap, keeping ecosystems functioning until new specialists evolve. The same principle guided dinosaur recoveries after lesser extinctions and shapes modern communities today. This raises a quiet question. As the planet warms, ice retreats, and human activity reshapes coasts and continents, which traits will matter most? Understanding how fermentation, armor, flexibility, and generalist behavior once helped life endure can guide conservation choices now. It can also suggest which species and which human systems are most likely to persist through the next great rearrangements that Earth's deep interior and changing climate will eventually impose. Those future rearrangements will not happen on an empty stage. They will act on a planet whose present shape still carries the long memory of earlier worlds. Millions of years ago, Earth had a very different arrangement of land and oceans, yet the outlines of today's continents are already hidden inside those ancient maps. Africa, the Americas, Eurasia, Australia, and Antarctica are not separate creations. They are fragments of Pangaea and of even older supercontinents that formed and broke before the first dinosaurs walked. Each modern continent rides on a tectonic plate that once locked together with its neighbors, then drifted away as the mantle slowly moved beneath the crust. Over time, this process pulled apart shared mountain belts, opened new ocean basins, and carried familiar landmasses into unfamiliar latitudes. Because of this long motion, present-day landscapes are, in a sense, traveling fossils of Pangaea. The Appalachian Mountains in eastern North America line up with the Caledonian and Variscan ranges in Europe and North Africa, all once part of the same collision zone when Pangaea formed. The Andes, the Himalaya, and the mountains of New Guinea owe their height to younger collisions that began as Pangaea broke, as new oceans opened on one side of a plate and subduction bit into another on the opposite edge. Ocean currents and climate zones also record this deep rearrangement. When continents cluster near the equator, broad land interiors tend to dry, encouraging deserts like those that once stretched across central Pangaea. When continents sit astride the poles, they allow large ice sheets to form and persist. Today, the narrow connection between the Atlantic and Arctic and the ring of water flowing around Antarctica guide major currents that move heat around the planet. As a result, they help decide where monsoon forests grow, where mid-latitude storms track, and where subtropical high-pressure belts favor deserts. Modern biodiversity hotspots are not random patches of life. They often sit where long-lasting uplifts, rifts, or stable plate fragments have created varied habitats and mild microclimates over tens of millions of years. The tropical Andes, the East African Rift, and the forests of Southeast Asia all reflect repeated pulses of uplift, erosion, and shifting rainfall that began when earlier continents collided or stretched. Many present arid zones, such as the interiors of Australia and southern Africa, descend from regions that spent long periods in dry climates during the age of dinosaurs and their predecessors. Across this history, Earth's climate has always changed, but the pace and drivers have mattered. Slow shifts driven by plate motion, mountain building, and gradual changes in ocean gateways gave ecosystems time to track new coastlines, new heights, and new temperature bands. Rapid changes driven by massive eruptions or impacts compressed that window and triggered crises. Today, human-driven warming is altering the rules much faster than most past tectonic changes. In this sense, the story of dinosaurs built to survive almost anything is also the story of a planet that keeps rearranging continents, redirecting currents, and redrawing climate zones. Life endures by following those moving lines. The next step is to see how, after Pangaea's deserts and forests, later worlds pushed dinosaur resilience to its limits once again. Over time, certain dinosaur lineages turned this moving map of deserts, forests, and coasts into an instruction manual for survival. Instead of a single winning design, Earth's long experiment produced several distinct survival architectures that met harsh conditions in very different ways. Sauropods represented one of the most striking solutions. Their immense size, long necks, and deep bodies formed a living fermentation chamber. Plant material entered the mouth, passed into vast digestive systems, and stayed there while microbes slowly broke it down. During this time, even low-quality vegetation from stressed landscapes could be turned into energy. As a result, large herds could move across semi-arid plains, tapping scattered patches of growth that would not have supported smaller, less efficient herbivores. Ankylosaurs embodied another approach. These low-slung animals carried dense armor plates, tail clubs, and powerful limb bones under a compact frame. This process of reinforcing the body, thickening the skin, and lowering the center of mass produced a kind of biological tank. Many lived in dusty lowlands and floodplains, close to the ground where ferns, cycads, and low shrubs grew even when taller forests thinned. Their design reduced vulnerability to predators and to shifting vegetation, turning them into long-term residents rather than short-term specialists. A quieter but equally important architecture appeared in small theropods and early birds. Feathers first formed as simple filaments and later became complex insulating coverings. Combined with high metabolic rates and agile skeletons, these features created animals that could hunt at night, endure sudden cold snaps, and shift diets as insects, small vertebrates, and seeds became available. Because of this flexibility, some feathered species occupied deserts, high latitudes, and upland regions that experienced strong seasonal change. Across 160 million years of dinosaur history, dominance at any single moment mattered less than persistence across many changing moments. The largest predators and the most abundant herbivores often rose quickly and vanished just as fast. Meanwhile, low-slung ankylosaurs, long-necked fermenters, and small feathered hunters continued through extinctions, volcanic winters, and reorganized continents. Their success rested on traits that buffered them against surprise. Many of the most resilient dinosaurs were not the showiest inhabitants of the planet. Some wandered polar forests through months of twilight. Others browsed quietly along river margins or crossed wind-swept dune fields. They survived background catastrophe by being hard to starve, hard to catch, and able to shift behavior when the familiar patterns of light, temperature, and plant growth changed. In human lives, pressures arrive on shorter timescales but follow similar themes: periods of scarcity, sudden upheaval, and long intervals of uncertainty. Which traits matter then? The record beneath the crust suggests that insulation in the broadest sense is valuable. Spare resources, supportive relationships, and habits that hold heat during lean seasons. So is flexibility, the mental equivalent of feathers and light bones that allow rapid adjustment when conditions change. As the night deepens, worries can feel large, but they unfold inside a much longer story. This planet has carried deserts, ice, forests, and oceans across the same ground where modern cities stand. Life has endured by bending rather than breaking. The next step is to see how the final age of dinosaurs tested that resilience one last time, under a sky that was about to change forever. Under that changing sky, the story reaches back to its beginning. Long before dinosaurs, long before forests, the planet was a glowing sphere of molten rock. The early surface was more ocean of magma than solid ground. Intense heat from impacts, radioactivity, and pressure kept the mantle churning. As this heat slowly escaped to space, a thin crust formed, broke, and formed again. Volcanic gases built a heavy atmosphere. Water vapor condensed, fell as relentless rain, and gathered into the first warm oceans. In those mineral-rich seas, life appeared as simple cells that clung to vents, rocks, and sediments. These early organisms endured crushing pressures, toxic chemicals, and constant volcanic disturbance. During this time, survival meant tolerating extremes rather than shaping the environment. Some microbes used chemical energy from the interior. Later, others learned to use sunlight. Over time, this process released oxygen, first into the oceans and then into the air, changing the chemistry of the entire planet. As the atmosphere and oceans evolved, the continents also changed. Small buoyant fragments of crust grew into early landmasses. Plate motions carried them together and tore them apart. Mountain belts rose where plates collided, then eroded, sending sediments back to the sea. Because of this continual motion, several supercontinents formed and vanished across deep time. Eventually, Pangaea assembled, stretching almost from pole to pole, surrounded by a vast global ocean. Life responded to each rearrangement. In the seas, simple animals gave way to more complex forms with shells, skeletons, and then jaws. On land, plants colonized damp shorelines, then spread inland, building soils and drawing carbon from the air. Insects, amphibians, and early reptiles followed. Each step created new opportunities but also new risks. When climates shifted or sea levels fell, ecosystems were squeezed. The Permian-Triassic extinction marked the most severe of these bottlenecks, removing the majority of species and resetting many habitats. From this crisis, certain lineages of archosaurs emerged with traits that favored endurance: efficient lungs, strong hearts, and upright postures that conserved energy over long distances. During the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, many competitors disappeared, but these archosaurs and the first dinosaurs persisted. As a result, they entered the Jurassic already adapted to heat, drought, and periodic environmental stress. The Mesozoic then became a long laboratory of survival experiments. Sauropods developed immense bodies and long necks, allowing them to move slowly through landscapes while reaching scattered vegetation. Ankylosaurs formed living armor, combining low-slung frames with powerful lungs and robust digestion that suited dusty, seasonal environments. In polar regions and high latitudes, small dinosaurs with large eyes and active metabolisms tolerated long winters and months of twilight. Feathered theropods refined insulation and agility, traits that later helped birds endure sudden cold snaps and volcanic winters. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, firestorms, darkness, and global cooling ended most dinosaur lineages. Yet some small feathered forms survived and evolved into modern birds. Beneath them, the plates still move, carrying continents into new patterns. In the quiet of the present night, this same tectonic engine continues to reshape oceans and climate. What happens when those surviving birds meet the final Mesozoic world at its most fragile, under a sky already filling with ash? Under that ash-filled sky, the surviving birds and their dinosaur relatives entered a world where disaster was not an exception, but a recurring pattern. Millions of years before the final impact, many lineages had already learned to treat catastrophe almost like weather. What does life look like when droughts, volcanic winters, and polar nights are not endings but seasons that return again and again? Across the great interiors of the continents, long before the last extinction, ankylosaurs grazed through dust-laden air. Their low, armored bodies hugged the surface, where sparse plants still clung to the crust. Wind drove grit against their plates and into their nostrils, yet broad ribs, powerful lungs, and efficient livers processed that harsh environment. During this time, dust storms did not mark the collapse of their world. They were simply another condition to endure, while the mantle-driven climate engine shifted heat and moisture from place to place. In other regions, fire swept through conifer forests as lightning struck drought-stressed canopies. Sauropods, towering over the flames, did not outrun every blaze. Instead, they often walked steadily away from burning valleys toward slopes where new shoots would soon appear. This process of destruction and regrowth created a shifting mosaic of blackened trunks and fresh greenery. Over time, long necks and immense digestive systems allowed these animals to track that new growth across vast distances, turning charred landscapes into temporary waypoints rather than permanent scars. Near high latitudes, where the planet leaned and the poles sank into months of darkness, small feathered theropods moved through snow and dim forests. Some, like polar ornithopods and early bird relatives, carried dense feather insulation and high metabolisms that converted food into steady internal heat. In ash-dimmed summers and extended polar nights, they hunted by touch, sound, and limited light, turning their own bodies into stable environments when the surface around them swung between extremes. Because of this, cold snaps and brief volcanic winters became survivable pauses rather than final thresholds. These were not mythical creatures invented to illustrate resilience. They were real animals whose bones, burrows, and trackways still lie locked into sedimentary layers of Earth's crust. A tail club impression in an ancient riverbed, a cluster of polar dinosaur burrow entrances, a growth ring pattern in bone that records alternating years of stress and abundance. Each preserves the imprint of survival strategies refined over millions of years. Set against this deep history, human timescales feel very short. Civilizations rise and fall within a few thousand years. Individual lives span decades. Dinosaur lineages, by contrast, carried their drought tolerance, fire-following habits, and insulation strategies through intervals that lasted longer than all of recorded human history, many times over. As a result, their story places present concerns within a wider planetary rhythm. This does not make current storms, fires, or climate shifts unimportant. Instead, it offers a quieter perspective. Life on this planet has long been learning, failing, and trying again under changing skies. What happens when the same tectonic forces, climate swings, and sudden shocks that shaped those resilient dinosaurs converge one final time in the Mesozoic under a night briefly brighter than day? When that night in the Mesozoic briefly turned brighter than day, it marked only one instant in a history measured not in hours, but in millions of years. Thinking on that scale stretches the sense of urgency. A single deadline, a single conversation, even a single difficult year becomes one small event against a background of shifting continents, rising mountains, and long, slow recoveries. This way of looking at Earth does not erase present worries. It places them in context. During this time, the same planet that shattered ecosystems with volcanic winters also allowed forests to return, rivers to carve new paths, and new lineages to emerge from the survivors. Anxiety and uncertainty remain real, but they sit beside the knowledge that change, even violent change, has always been part of the story written into the crust and mantle. There is a quiet continuity here. The rocks beneath the floor, the bedrock under cities and coastlines, once lay in other climates and at other latitudes. Over time, the same tectonic engine that pulled Pangaea together and then tore it apart has continued to move the continents. This process still drives earthquakes, mountain building, and the slow opening and closing of ocean basins. Because of this, the present surface is not separate from ancient Earth. It is the latest expression of the same deep motions. Consider those late Triassic droughts and early Jurassic cold snaps, sauropods that endured months of scarcity, ankylosaurs that tolerated dust and impact, and feathered theropods that survived sudden winters all faced conditions that seemed absolute in their severity. Yet even those extremes passed. Sediments buried their footprints, rivers shifted course, and new habitats formed on top of the old. What feels permanent in the moment often becomes only a thin layer in the rock record. Here the pattern interrupt appears. What if the most comforting part of this entire history is not the dinosaurs at all, but the idea of layering? Every life becomes one brief stratum in a very thick stack of geological and biological stories. Each layer adapts in its own way, responds to its own stresses, and then yields space to the next. No single layer carries the whole planet on its shoulders. From this perspective, a late-night mind racing beneath modern lights is sharing the same Earth that once lay under polar nights and desert suns. The same gravity holds everything in place. The same cycles of stress and recovery continue, from shifting plates to changing climates. As a result, there is permission to treat the present as one chapter, not the entire book. The invitation is simple. Let this deep time view settle in the background so that tomorrow's noise arrives against a wider horizon. And if the world feels too loud again on another night, these long stories of continents, mantle heat, and resilient creatures will still be here, waiting to be unfolded once more. Seen from this wider horizon, dinosaur bodies begin to look less like curiosities and more like careful engineering. Armor plates, insulating feathers, and those enormous fermentation chambers in sauropod bellies were not random decorations. They were survival architectures, shaped again and again as the planet's climate lurched between drought and flood, furnace heat and sudden chill, fragmented habitats and brief windows of abundance. During this time in Earth's history, the continents were often joined into vast landmasses that created extremes. Interior regions of Pangaea baked under dry skies, while high latitudes slipped into months of darkness. Ankylosaurs, with their low-slung frames and dense shields of bone, moved through abrasive, dusty environments where predators and flying debris were constant threats. Small feathered theropods carried their insulation with them, turning delicate filaments into portable climate control as volcanic winters dimmed the sun. This process of trial and error produced bodies that could ride out chaos rather than avoid it. Polar dinosaurs, such as Liaelinosaura, endured long nights near the Antarctic Circle, relying on keen vision and likely elevated metabolisms to keep moving when the surface lay in cold twilight. Sauropods with deep chests and vast guts converted poor fibrous plants into steady energy, buffering themselves against patchy food and long migrations. Because of this, some lineages passed through droughts, fires, and eruptions that erased less adaptable neighbors. Over time, these repeated experiments echo into present problems. Water scarcity, extreme heat waves, rapid climate swings, and fractured habitats are no longer confined to the deep past. They now press on modern ecosystems and human societies that share the same planet and the same thin crust above a still hot mantle. Cities sprawl across coasts and river plains that will face rising seas and shifting rainfall, while crops and forests confront temperatures and storms outside recent experience. In this context, a quiet question emerges. What are the equivalent survival architectures for this era? Some are technological, resilient energy systems that do not fail with a single broken line, buildings that shed heat instead of trapping it, infrastructure designed to bend rather than break. Others are social and behavioral, networks that share water across regions, flexible work and migration patterns, traditions that remember past floods and droughts instead of forgetting them between generations. The dinosaur record suggests that resilience rarely comes from a single perfect design. It comes from diversity, redundancy, and flexibility living side by side. Tanks like ankylosaurs, long-necked wanderers like sauropods, feathered generalists, able to shift diets and behaviors when conditions turned. In the same way, a varied set of responses, spread across cultures, technologies, and landscapes, may matter more than any single invention. Seen this way, modern societies are not standing outside the narrative of Earth's history. They are late arrivals in an ongoing experiment, inheriting a planet that has ended and restarted worlds many times. The next chapter will be written by how these new architectures meet the same old forces of heat, ice, and shifting continents, and by how consciously they are chosen. Seen this way, the long experiment of Earth does not end with modern cities. It loops back into a much older rhythm. To close that loop, it helps to trace the arc once more, from the first molten dawn of the planet to the quiet darkness surrounding the present night. In Earth's earliest history, intense heat from impacts and radioactivity kept the surface as a restless ocean of magma. The young crust that formed was thin and fragile, broken again and again as the mantle moved beneath it. Over time, small rafts of more buoyant rocks survived this process and grew into the first stable fragments of continents. Around them, steam condensed into rain, and long unbroken storms filled the low places with early seas. As the planet cooled further, the lithosphere broke into plates that began to drift. Because of this motion, continents collided and separated, building mountains and opening oceans in repeating cycles. Supercontinents such as Rodinia and later Pangaea formed when scattered landmasses were drawn together. During this time, deserts spread far into the interior. Polar regions supported forests in long summer light and extended winter dusk, and broad fire plains of lava reshaped the surface after major eruptions. Life threaded through all of these transformations. It endured global glaciations, toxic oceans, and the end Permian crisis that erased most species. As a result, the ecosystems that emerged on Pangaea were built from survivors. Dinosaurs rose within this framework, not as fragile ornaments, but as bodies designed to meet drought, heat, cold snaps, and darkness. Some, like heavy ankylosaurs, turned dusty lowlands into territory rather than hazard, their low-slung forms and dense armor making harsh environments manageable. Other dinosaurs adapted to very different edges of the planet. Small feathered theropods and early birds carried insulation that allowed them to withstand sudden volcanic winters. In high-latitude regions, polar dinosaurs such as Ankylosaura lived through months of twilight and night, their enlarged eyes and active metabolisms turning extended darkness into a workable season. Even the immense sauropods that crossed semi-arid floodplains treated shifting rivers and patchy vegetation as part of a long, repeating pattern. Non-avian dinosaurs are gone, but their descendants remain in the trees, on power lines, and in wetlands. Every bird carries skeletal patterns, lungs, and metabolisms refined during this time when surviving extremes was routine. The same anatomical solutions that once faced supercontinent droughts and polar winters now navigate city lights and seasonal storms. Beyond all of this, Earth continues to turn. The planet spins under the stars as it has for billions of years, carrying oceans, continents, forests, and a single small life through space. Each rotation links the first magma oceans to tonight's quiet sky. What does it mean to fall asleep on a world with such a deep past? Sleep can be seen as another cycle in this long history, a nightly extinction of waking thought followed by renewal. During this time, memories of a single day can settle beside images of fire plains, polar forests, and vanished reptiles, then rise rearranged by morning light. Just as continents drift, merge, and separate, thoughts can shift and reorganize in the dark. As the planet continues its slow spin, another question waits beyond this night. What new chapter will unfold when dawn returns, and which ancient patterns will surface again in the light? Thoughts drift, then return, the way continents circle back through the supercontinent cycle. In the same way, attention has remained with this long journey, from a molten beginning to deserts, polar forests, and the hard-built frames of dinosaurs that endured nearly everything the planet could offer. Staying with that span of time, especially this late at night, is its own quiet act of endurance. Over time, hours in the present can begin to feel different when set beside billions of years. This entire path has followed Earth from an early glowing sphere to a world with shifting plates, rising mountains, and resilient reptiles standing under unfamiliar constellations. That steady focus, held while the room darkens and outside sounds fade, is a small parallel to the long patience of this planet's crust and mantle. If the screen is still open and eyes are still following these lines, there is an invitation waiting, rather than a demand. Consider staying connected for more slow passages through deep time, more ancient continents assembling and breaking apart, more creatures built for drought, darkness, and volcanic winters, more glimpses into the hidden machinery of heat and rock beneath the surface. During this time, a simple tap to subscribe or follow can act as a marker, a way of returning to these extended, unhurried explorations whenever the present day feels too narrow. This process does not need to end with this episode. Any point in this story can be revisited, whether it is the magma ocean stage, the early rains that formed the first oceans, or the later ages when ankylosaurs, sauropods, and feathered theropods turned catastrophe into routine weather. Because of this, the video can become a familiar place, a calm, steady voice, returning again and again to Earth's long memory whenever a reminder is needed that the planet has passed through far worse nights. There is a choice now, as the last images fade. One path is simple. Let the mind drift off with a final picture of dinosaurs under distant stars, desert winds moving around armored backs, polar forests standing silent through months of darkness, and small feathered shapes settling into burrows as the sky turns. Another path is to queue up the next journey, to step from this forgotten era into another, and continue following continents as they shift and reorganize in the dark. Whichever path is taken, the same world waits outside the window. The ground beneath the building rests on ancient rocks that once lay in other climates and at other latitudes. The air has passed through countless cycles of heat and cold, through extinctions and recoveries. The same sky arches overhead, shared with every creature that has ever walked across this surface. For now, it is enough to rest and let that vastness hold smaller worries at the edge of awareness, the way deep oceans hold old sediments, quiet and undisturbed until morning returns.